The Arizona Territory in 1875 was a hard country. It was a land of rock and sky, where the sun burned away everything soft and left only what was strong enough to endure. The stagecoach wheels groaned in the deep ruts of the trail, kicking up a plume of alkali dust that hung in the air like a ghost. Inside, Evelyn Harper held a kerchief to her face, tasting the grit on her teeth. She was returning from Red Rock, the nearest town, back to the small ranch her father owned. The coach was stuffed with mail sacks, barrels of flour, and 2 other passengers, a whiskey drummer with sweat stains on his vest and a quiet woman in black. The sun was a bleed of orange and purple in the west, painting the undersides of the few high clouds. It was the hour when the heat of the day finally broke, but the cool of the night had not yet settled. It was an hour of truce, usually. Not tonight. The first shot cracked the silence, a sharp report that echoed off the mesas. The whiskey drummer yelped as the bullet punched a clean hole through the coach roof, just inches above his head. Then came the yells, a high, keening sound meant to freeze the blood. Ambush, the driver screamed from his box. "Hold on!" The whip cracked like a second rifle shot, and the coach lurched forward, throwing Evelyn hard against the mail sacks. She scrambled to the window, peering out into the twilight. They were everywhere. Horsemen, stripped to the waist, their skins slick with sweat and crude paint. Feathers bounced in their hair. They fanned out from the rocks, whooping and firing rifles into the air, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The woman in black began to pray, her words a frantic whisper. The driver and the shotgun guard were firing back, their heavier guns barking a reply. A horse screamed, a terrible sound. The coach bucked, slowed. They shot a leader, the driver bellowed. The attackers swarmed them. A man with a face painted a ghastly white and red yanked the driver's door open. Evelyn recognized him, or thought she did, beneath the paint. It was the eyes. Luke Carver, a man who ran a rough crew of rustlers and hired guns, a man who was supposed to be in another county. He was not Navajo. He was not Apache. He was white. Carver grinned, showing yellow teeth. He leveled his pistol at the whiskey drummer. "Toss it all out, mail, boxes, and your wallets." His men, all disguised, were pulling the guard from the box, beating him with their rifle butts. They were not warriors. They were thieves in a disgusting costume, playing on the deepest fears of the settlers to cover their crime. Evelyn felt a surge of cold anger replace her fear. They were doing this to blame the Navajo, to spread hatred, to give soldiers a reason. Chaos erupted from a new direction. A single shot, quiet as a whisper compared to the heavy rifles, came from the ridgeline above them. One of Carver's men, the one holding the team's reins, suddenly stiffened. He looked down at the arrow shaft protruding from his shoulder, his expression one of pure confusion, before he slid off his horse and did not move. Carver spun around, firing his pistol wildly into the rocks. Where did he come from? Another arrow took a second man in the leg, making him howl and drop his rifle. A figure rose from the boulders, standing tall against the last light. He was Navajo. There was no paint on his face, only the hard lines of the land itself. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple cotton shirt. His hair was tied with a leather cord. He moved with a grace that made Carver's men look clumsy and drunk. He knocked another arrow, his movements fluid and economical. He was not shooting to kill, Evelyn realized. He was shooting to disable. He was driving them off. Carver, seeing his advantage lost, shrieked at his men. "Forget the gold, it is a trap ride." One of the men, perhaps not hearing his boss, saw Evelyn at the window. He saw her dress, her pale skin, and his eyes lit with a different kind of greed. He lunged for her door, ripping it open and grabbing her arm. He dragged her onto the dusty ground, raising a long skinning knife. Evelyn screamed, kicking at him, but he was too strong. She closed her eyes, bracing for the steel. A shadow moved faster than she could follow. There was a thud, the sound of a body hitting the earth. She opened her eyes. The Navajo warrior stood over her. He had not used his bow. He had struck her attacker with the heavy wooden stock of his own rifle, knocking the man cold. The warrior, Tahoma, watched her, His face was unreadable, his dark eyes seeming to take in everything at once. He saw the terror in her, but he also saw the defiance that had not quite broken. He saw the curiosity that was already pushing past the fear. He reached down, not with violence, but with a steady strength, and pulled her to her feet. He pushed her back toward the relative safety of the coach. "Stay down," he said. His voice was low, the English words precise. He turned as Carver, furious at the intervention, fired his last shot. The bullet chipped the rock where Tahoma had been standing a second before. The warrior did not even flinch. He simply raised his bow and sent an arrow flying. It did not strike Carver, but it tore the hat from his head, embedding itself in the wooden side of the coach just an inch from Carver's ear. It was a message, a warning. Carver stared at the quivering arrow, his face pale beneath the running paint. He cursed, wheeled his horse around, and spurted into the darkness, his remaining men scattering behind him. The silence that fell was heavy, broken only by the sobbing of the woman in black and the groan of the wounded guard. Evelyn looked for her rescuer. He was gone. He had vanished back into the rocks and the twilight, as if he were a spirit of the high desert, leaving only the arrows and the unconscious outlaw as proof he had ever been there. She touched her arm where the man had grabbed her, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He was nothing like the stories told of savages who burned and killed without mercy. This man was protected. He had fought with precision. He had saved her. By the time the cavalry patrol, drawn by the sound of the fight, arrived 15 minutes later, there was nothing to see but a looted coach, a few wounded men, and Evelyn Harper, standing alone in the dust, staring at the dark ridge line. The ride back to the Harper Ranch was made in silence, with 2 soldiers as escorts. The ranch was not a grand place, just a solid house built of cottonwood and adobe, a good barn, and corrals that held about 200 head of longhorn cattle. It sat in a wide valley that held its green longer than most, fed by a stream that ran down from the high mesas. Her father met her on the porch, his face etched with worry. Dr. Harper was a tall man, made thin by work and memory. He had served as a surgeon in the Union Army, had seen enough killing in those 4 years to last a lifetime, and had come west to Arizona seeking a peace he had not yet found. "Evelyn," he said, his voice rough, "you are not harmed. I am safe." "Father," she said, letting him hold her for a moment. She could smell the familiar scent of lye soap and tobacco on his shirt. They said it was an attack. Navajo. Evelyn hesitated, the image of Carver's painted face flashing in her mind. They were dressed as Navajo, but they were not. They were white men. "Father, I am sure of it." Her father's face tightened. He knew what that meant. It meant someone was trying to start a fire. Her brother, Jesse, burst out of the house, a Winchester rifle in his hand. He was 18, full of fire and quick opinions, all angles and restless energy. He lived for the speed of a good horse and the solid feel of a gun in his hands. "Did you see them? Did you shoot at them?" he demanded. "Jesse, put that away," Dr. Harper said, his voice sharp. "Your sister has been through an ordeal. It was not Navajo." "Jesse," Evelyn said quietly, looking at her brother's eager, angry face. "It was Carver's gang." Jesse spat into the dust. "Carver, he is hiding behind the Navajo, the coward. If I ever see him, you will do nothing," Dr. Harper said. "You will go and help the ranch hands with the evening feed. This is not your fight." Jesse looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew that set line of his father's jaw. He stalked off toward the barn, his rifle still held tight in his grip. Later that evening, the real trouble sat in their parlor. Major Nathan Briggs and the young railroad engineer, Charles Whitmore. Briggs was a man who seemed to have been baked hard by the sun, his face a map of impatience. He commanded the local cavalry detachment and believed the only way to civilize the territory was at the point of a saber. Charles was the opposite. He was pale and polite, dressed in a smart suit despite the heat. He was a man of maps and numbers, the advance man for the Transcontinental's new spur line. "This attack proves my point." "Dr. Harper," Briggs said, tapping a rolled map on his knee, "the situation is unstable. The Navajo are restless. This railroad is a matter of national security. It will bring order. It will bring prosperity. It will also cut directly through the grazing land my father and I have worked for 10 years, Evelyn said. entering with a tray of coffee. She would not be silent. Charles stood immediately, his face flushing. "Evelyn, we were so worried when we heard. Are you well? I am well." "Charles." "No thanks to the Major's patrols," which arrived after the fight was over. Briggs gave her a cold look. "My men have a great deal of territory to cover, Miss Harper. Perhaps if we had a clear mandate to remove the native threat, we could better protect citizens like you. The threat tonight was not native." "Major," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "It was Luke Carver." Briggs waved a dismissive hand. "A rumor. Carver is a ghost." "No, this has all the hallmarks of a renegade buck, and it is why we need this railroad. It will pass right through this valley. Doctor, it will make you rich. The company is prepared to offer a generous sum for your land. It is not just his land." "Major," Evelyn said, "the line you have mapped goes straight across the Dineta, the Navajo sacred lands. It will cut them off their water. It will destroy them." Charles stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her arm. "Evelyn, please, these are complex matters. The engineering demands it. We are bringing civilization, progress. The native tribes will be compensated. They will be moved to better lands, safer lands." Evelyn looked at him. Charles Whitmore was her intended fiancé. The match had been arranged by her father, who saw in Charles a stable future for his daughter. He saw safety, a life in town, away from dust and danger. Dr. Harper wanted his daughter to have the soft hands of a lady, not the calloused palms of a rancher. Evelyn had agreed to the engagement out of loyalty, out of love for her father. She felt no passion for Charles, only a mild, sisterly affection. He was a kind man, but he was weak. She saw it now, in the way his eyes slid away from hers, in the way he deferred to the Major. He was a man who followed orders, a man who would always choose his career over his conscience. "I do not want better lands." "Charles," she said, pulling her arm away, "I want this one, and perhaps they do too." She left the parlor, walking out into the cool night air. She loved this place. She loved the smell of the dry grass and the distant scent of pine from the high country. She loved the enormous star-filled sky that felt close enough to touch. The society she knew, the one represented by Charles and Major Briggs, told her that a good woman should want to move to town. She should want fine dresses and quiet afternoons. She should marry, be silent, and let her husband speak for her. But Evelyn felt trapped. She was caught between the quiet, respectable life she was supposed to want and the wild, free call of the land itself. She was a virgin in every sense, not just of the body, but of life. She had never truly lived, never truly chosen her own path, and tonight, for the first time, she had seen something that resonated with that hidden part of her, the quiet strength of the Navajo warrior, the way he moved as if he were part D of the rock and the wind, the way he had looked at her, not as a prize or a problem, but as a person. Miles away, in a hidden camp nestled deep in a canyon, Tahoma cleaned his rifle. The small fire lit each other's faces. His uncle, a man called Gray Salt, watched him. "You fought white men to save a white woman," Gray Salt said. It was not a question. "They were thieves," Tahoma said, not looking up. "They wore paint to blame our people. They are the ones who bring the soldiers. And the girl, she is the rancher's daughter. She is the one promised to the railroad man who measures our land." Tahoma stopped his work. He looked into the fire. "She was in danger. I acted. You act too much from the past," another elder said. "You were a scout for the Blue Coats. You wore their uniform. You led them through our canyons, thinking they were your friends. You showed them the water, and they thanked you by pushing us from our homes. Have you forgotten the long walk Tahoma's hands tightened on the rifle? He could never forget. He carried the shame of it, the guilt of his own youthful ignorance. He had believed the soldiers when they spoke of peace. He had believed in their paper promises. He had been a fool, and his people had paid the price. "I will not let it happen again," Tahoma said, his voice low and fierce. "I know how they think. I know how they lie. I will not let them take this last valley. I will not let them break the world." "Then why save her?" Gray Salt asked, his voice softer. "She is one of them. Letting them kill each other is not our fight." Tahoma remembered her eyes. Fear, yes, but also the bright spark of anger, of curiosity. She had not seen him as a devil. She had looked at him like a man. "I do not know," Tahoma said, and it was the truth. "But I know this. The railroad man and the soldier, Briggs, will use this attack. They will use her, and the war they want is coming." He stared into the flames, seeing not the past, but the terrible, bloody future hurtling toward them, a future as loud and as destructive as the Iron Horse itself. And somehow, he knew the woman with the steady eyes would be at the very center of it. A few days later, Evelyn rode into Red Rock. The town was little more than one dusty street lined with false front buildings, but it was the only supply point for 100 miles. She tied her horse to the hitching rail outside the general store, her mind still replaying the ambush. The stagecoach line had suspended service, citing the native uprising, which meant everyone was forced to ride in for their own goods. The air was thick with tension and the smell of stale beer drifting from the saloon next door. As she stepped onto the boardwalk, she saw Charles Whitmore's surveying buggy parked outside that very saloon. Her father needed laudanum for his medical bag, and the store was out, sending her to the doctor's office, which was inconveniently located past the saloon. She kept her head down, hoping to slip by unnoticed. The bat-wing doors of the saloon swung open, and a man's laughter, loud and oily, spilled out. "That is a fine plan, Major." A fine plan indeed. Evelyn froze. She recognized the voice. It belonged to a man named Henderson, a representative for the railroad company who had visited the ranch. She stepped back, into the narrow alleyway between the store and the saloon. The saloon's back window was propped open with a stick to catch the faint breeze. Their voices carried clearly. "It is not a plan, Henderson. It is a necessity," Major Briggs said, his voice curt. "Washington wants progress, but they are squeamish about the methods. They will not grant me the troops I need based on rumors. They need proof." "So we shall give them proof," came a third voice. Charles, her fiancé. Evelyn felt her stomach clench. His voice was trying to sound cordial, to match the others, but it came out thin. That little stagecoach incident was a good start. Briggs continued, and Evelyn heard the clink of glasses, but it was not enough. Carver's men were too clumsy. They were driven off by a single renegade. "We need something definitive, something that stinks of savagery." Henderson chuckled. "What are you proposing, Major? A bonfire?" "I am proposing that if a few settlers, perhaps ones who have refused to sell to the railroad, were to be found burned out, scalped well. Even a politician in Washington can understand scalping. The public would demand action. I would get my orders. The valley would be cleared, the land secured, and your tracks could be laid by Christmas." Evelyn pressed her hand against the rough wood of the wall, feeling sick. She was listening to them plan murder. They were talking about her neighbors. "It is a dirty business," Charles said, his voice barely a whisper. "It is the only business, son," Briggs snapped. "It is how the world works. This territory is not settled with prayer books. It is settled with rifles and railway spikes. The native will be moved to a reservation, a better place. They will be fed, cared for. This is better for everyone in the end. Now." To the maps, Evelyn did not wait to hear more. She fled, her boots silent in the thick dust of the alley. She stumbled back to her horse, her hands shaking so badly she could barely untie the reins. She forgot the laudanum. She forgot the flour and the coffee beans. She just needed to get away. She found Charles an hour later, down by the dry creek bed where his survey team was camped. He was alone, studying one of his maps, a pencil behind his ear. He looked up as she approached, his face brightening into a smile. "Evelyn, what a pleasant surprise. I was going to ride out to the ranch this evening." "I was in town," she said, her voice flat. She swung down from her horse. "I was outside the saloon." The smile vanished from his face. He knew immediately. His skin became pale, and he looked away, fussing with the map. "It is hot today. You should be wearing your bonnet." "Do you know what they are planning?" she demanded, walking right up to him. "Do you know what Briggs means to do, Evelyn?" "These are not matters for you to worry about," he said, attempting a patronizing tone. "It is complex. Politics, military strategy. He's going to have men, women, and children murdered. Charles, he's going to have them scalped and blame the Navajo so he can steal their land for your railroad. That is not politics. That is butchery." He flinched at her words. "You do not understand. The world is changing. This railroad is progressing. It is the future. Sometimes the path to the future is not clean. The path to the future," she repeated, her voice incredulous. "Is that what you call it? And what about the Navajo? What about their future?" "They will be moved to a reservation," he said, parroting Briggs's words. "A new place. They will be safer there. They will be given food, taught to farm. It is for their own good. Their own good to be ripped from their homes, from the land that is their religion, their history. Everything they are to be put in a pen and fed scraps like animals. You cannot believe that. It is how the world works." "Evelyn," he burst out, his frustration finally showing. "It is a hard world, and we cannot save everyone. This is my career. It is our future, the one your father wants for us. Do not throw that away for a feeling. These savages do not know what is best for them. We do." She stared at him. This was the man she had promised to marry. This was the man who was supposed to protect her. He was weak. He was a coward, hiding his greed and his fear behind pretty words like progresses and future. "I think," she said, her voice very cold and very quiet, "that you are the savage, Charles." She turned and remounted her horse before he could find a reply. She rode away, not looking back, the dust from her horse's hooves settling on his fine, polished boots. She was halfway home, the sun a heavy weight on her shoulders, when the choice became terrifyingly clear. She could stay silent. She could marry Charles, pretend she had not heard, and live a comfortable, empty life while innocent people were slaughtered in her name. Or she could speak. She could fight. She could stand up and shout the truth. But what would that mean? She would be one woman against the United States Army, against the railroad. She would be calling Major Briggs a liar and a murderer. She would be putting her father, her brother, and her home in direct danger. She would be an outcast. The weight of the decision pressed down on her, heavier than the Arizona sun. Her entire life, she had done what was expected. Now, for the first time, she was being asked to choose who she actually was. Her thoughts were so tangled that she did not notice the rider until he was right on her. He came out of a dry wash, his horse blocking the trail. He was a rough man, with a beard stained by tobacco and a pistol already drawn. "Well now, look at this," he drawled, his eyes roaming over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "A pretty lady, all alone. Your PA should know better than to let you ride by yourself, especially with all these dangerous renegades about." Evelyn's hand went to the small pistol her father insisted she carry in her saddlebag. It was not there. She had been in such a hurry to leave town. She had forgotten to check it. "What do you want?" she said, trying to keep her voice even. "Oh, just passing the time," he said. He nudged his horse closer. "But since you are here, I hear some folks have been listening at windows that ain't theirs, hearing things that ain't their business." Her blood ran cold. This was not a random robbery. This was a message. This was Briggs. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said. "I think you do." He grinned, his smile all broken. "The Major. He doesn't like folks listening in. He thinks it is impolite. He asked me to give you a little warning, just to help you remember your manners." He lunged, grabbing her horse's bridle. His other hand snaked out and grabbed her arm, yanking her forward. "Maybe I will take a little payment for my trouble first," she cried out, striking at him with her free hand. But he was strong. He backhanded her, the force of the blow snapping her head back, tasting blood on her lip. Just as he was pulling her from the saddle, an arrow appeared in his shoulder. It was the same as before, a clean shot, sinking deep into the muscle, not killing, but disabling. The man screamed, his hand flying to the arrow shaft, his pistol dropping into the dust. He stared at his shoulder in disbelief, then looked up at the rocks above the trail. Tahoma was there. He dropped from the ledge, landing as silently as a cat. He held his bow in one hand and a knife in the other. He did not look at Evelyn. His eyes were fixed on the henchman. "You," the man whispered, his face white with terror. "You are the one from the coach." Tahoma walked toward him. each step measured and deliberate. The henchman tried to raise his other hand, but Tahoma was too fast. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, and a bone snapped. The man shrieked. Tahoma struck him once at the base of the skull with the heavy pommel of his knife. The man collapsed in a heap, unconscious. Silence returned to the trail. Tahoma stood over the fallen man for a long moment. Then, with a quick, decisive movement, he used his knife to cut a small, strange symbol into the man's leather vest, just over his heart. A warning, a mark. He was returning the message. He finally turned to Evelyn. She was sitting on her horse, her whole body shaking, her hand pressed to her bleeding lip. He walked to her, his movements calm, and stood looking up at her. He saw the new bruise forming on her cheek. His eyes hardened, but his voice was soft. "He hurt you." "I'm all right," she whispered. She looked at the man on the ground, then back at him. "You came again. This land has many eyes," Tahoma said. "I saw you ride from the town. I saw him follow you." He reached into his own saddlebag and pulled out a small leather pouch. He shook some dried herbs into his palm, chewed them quickly, and then gently pressed the poultice against her split lip. The sting was sharp, but the pain began to fade almost immediately. She was struck by his gentleness, the careful way his rough fingers touched her skin. She was close enough to see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the scar that ran along his jaw. He was not a savage. He was a man. "You're English," she said, the words coming out muffled. "It is very good. You learned on a mission." His face tightened. "I learned it from the soldiers. I was a scout for them, before I knew what they were." He stepped back, his gaze sweeping the trail. Alert. You should not ride alone. This was a warning. From the soldier. "Briggs." "I know," she said. "I heard them. In the saloon. They are planning to attack the settlements. To blame your people?" His dark eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw a flicker of surprise. He had not expected this. He had not expected her to know. "Why do you tell me?" he asked. "Because it is wrong," she said simply. "They are going to kill innocent people." Tahoma studied her face, searching for the lie, for the trap. He saw none. He saw fear, and he saw anger. But he also saw a kind of honesty he had never encountered in a white person before. He had saved her life twice, but this was the first time they had truly seen each other. He saw a woman who did not look at him as our red devil, and she saw a man who was the only person in the whole territory who had as much reason as she did to want the truth to come out. "They will not believe you," Tahoma said, his voice flat. "They will call you a liar, or crazy, or worse." "I know," she whispered. He nodded, a sharp, decisive gesture. "Go home, Evelyn Harper, and stay there. You are stirring up a nest of snakes, and you have no poison of your own." He picked up the henchman's fallen pistol, emptied its chambers, and threw it far into the brush. He whistled, and his horse, a lean pinto, stepped out from the rocks. He mounted in one fluid motion. "Wait," she called out. "Your name?" "I do not know your name." He paused, looking back at her, the sun catching the black shine of his hair. "I am Tahoma," he said, and then he was gone, melting back into the canyons, leaving her alone with the unconscious henchman and the terrible weight of the truth. When she finally reached the ranch, her father was waiting. He saw her lip, the bruise on her cheek, and his face went ashen. "My God, Evelyn, what happened?" She told him. Not all of it. Not about Tahoma, but she told him about the man on the trail. And she told him what she had overheard in Red Rock. She told him about Briggs's plan. Dr. Harper sank into his chair, his hands covering his face. He looked 10 years older. "You cannot," he said, his voice muffled. "Evelyn, you must not say a word of this to anyone. Do you hear me? You will be silent." "But, Father, they are going to fighting the army and the railroad is suicide," he interrupted, his voice rising with a fear she had never heard from him. "They will crush you. They will crush us. They will take this ranch. They will find a reason to hang Jesse, and they will destroy everything we have built. I have seen what these men do in war. You have not. Your only duty is to be safe, to be silent. Promise me." Her father's desperation was a heavier blow than the henchman's. She saw in his eyes the old terror of the war, the fear of a man who had seen the machine and knew it was useless to stand in its way. By the end of the week, the gossip had spread through the valley. That Harper girl, the one who was always riding where she should not, got herself into trouble on the trail. Some said she had been meeting a lover. Some whispered she had been talking to the Navajo. She was strange. She was wild. She was not behaving as a woman engaged to be married should. Evelyn stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mesas, the same colors as the night of the first ambush. She was trapped. Her father demanded silence for safety. Her society demanded silence for propriety. Her fiancé demanded silence for his ambition. But Tahoma's words echoed in her ears. They will not believe you. She realized he was wrong. They might not believe her. But she had to make them listen. She understood, with a chilling and profound certainty, that if she stood for the truth, if she stood with the Navajo, she would be standing against everyone she knew, against her family, against her friends, against her entire world. The choice was no longer just about her. It was about what kind of world she was willing to live in, and what she was willing to do to keep it. 2 days after Evelyn stood on the porch wrestling with her conscience, the decision was taken out of her hands by fire. It began as a dark smudge against the azure morning sky to the south, a stain that grew until it choked the horizon. It was the Miller Ranch. The Millers were good people, a family of 5 who had shared Sunday dinners with the Harpers for 6 years. By noon, a rider from the volunteer patrol galloped into the Harper yard, his horse lathered and blowing hard. He brought news that chilled the blood of every hand in the place. The Miller homestead was gone. The house was a skeleton of charred timber. The cattle had been hamstrung and left to die in the sun, and the family lay dead in the yard, their bodies mutilated in ways the rider could barely bring himself to describe. The witness, a stable boy who had hidden in the root cellar, claimed he saw men with painted faces and feathers in their hair. He said they screamed in a language he did not know. By evening, Major Nathan Briggs sat once again in the Harper parlor. This time, he did not ask. He demanded. He slammed a heavy fist onto the oak table, making the china rattle. "It is war. Dr. Harper." Briggs roared, his face flushed a deep, angry red. "They have struck a peaceful family. They have butchered women and children. Do you still speak of patience? Do you still speak of treaties? Washington will hear of this by telegraph within the hour. I am mobilizing every able-bodied man. We will sweep that valley clean." Dr. Harper sat with his head in his hands. He looked defeated. The violence against the Millers had shattered his resistance. He pushed a roll of canvas across the table toward the major. "Take them," the doctor whispered. "The topographical surveys, the water sources, the hidden trails into the canyon. If they have chosen this path, I can no longer protect them." Evelyn stood in the corner, her knuckles white as she gripped the back of a chair. She knew this was a lie. She knew in her gut that the painted men were Carver and his gang, acting on orders that likely originated from the very man standing in her living room. But she had no proof. Her words against a massacre would sound like madness. Briggs unrolled the maps, his eyes gleaming with triumph. He traced a line with a thick finger. "We move out at dawn. We will strike the heart of their territory before they can regroup." Then his gaze shifted to Evelyn. It was a cold, calculating look that made her skin crawl. "Miss Harper will accompany us," Briggs announced. The room went silent. Charles Whitmore, who had been standing quietly by the window, stepped forward. "Major, surely that is not necessary. A military column is no place for a lady." "On the contrary," Briggs said smoothly. "It is the safest place for her. With the Millers dead, no ranch is safe. If Carver or these savages attack here while the men are away, she would be defenseless. Furthermore, her presence will serve a purpose. She knows the terrain near the entrance to the valley better than my scouts. And frankly, after her recent adventures in town, I think it is best she is kept where we can see her, for her own protection." Of course, Evelyn saw the trap. He did not want her safe. He wanted her silent. He knew she had heard something in that alley. If she was with the column, she could not send a warning. She could not run. She would be a hostage in everything but name. Charles looked at Evelyn, then back at the major. He nodded slowly. "Perhaps the major is right. Evelyn, it is dangerous here alone." and it might be good for you to see the reality of the situation, to see the threat we are facing. It will help you understand why the railroad is necessary." Evelyn looked at her father, but he was staring at the floor, lost in his grief for the neighbors. She looked at Charles, seeing only blind ambition. She realized she had no choice. If she refused, Briggs would likely arrest her or have her detained under martial law. At least if she was out there, she might find a chance to do something. "I will go," she said, her voice steady. "But I ride my own horse, and I carry my own gun." The column moved out before the sun had fully cleared the mesas. It was a formidable force, 200 cavalrymen in blue wool uniforms that were already dark with sweat, dragging 2 mountain howitzers on heavy caissons. Along with them rode a dozen armed civilians, including Charles and several railroad surveyors. Evelyn rode near the center, flanked by Charles and a corporal who had clearly been ordered not to let her out of his sight. The heat rose in shimmering waves off the hardpan. The sound of hundreds of horses and the clanking of sabers echoed off the canyon walls. It was the sound of an invasion. They pushed deep into the Badlands, navigating the twisty, treacherous paths that led toward the Navajo stronghold. Evelyn scanned the high ridges constantly. She felt eyes on them. She knew they were being watched, somewhere up in those red rocks. Tahoma was waiting. The thought gave her a strange mixture of hope and fear. By mid-afternoon, the terrain had narrowed. They were entering a box canyon, a place of deep shadows and towering walls of sandstone. It was a perfect kill zone. Evelyn felt the hair on her arms stand up. "Major," she called out, spurring her horse forward to where Briggs rode. "This is a mistake. The acoustics here if anyone is waiting." Briggs laughed. "That is why we have the cannons. Miss Harper, let them show themselves," as if in answer to his arrogance. The world exploded. It did not start with arrows. It started with the crack of repeating rifles from the rim of the canyon. But the shots were not aimed at the soldiers. They were aimed at the rocks above the column. The impact sent showers of shale and boulders raining down, creating panic. "Ambush!" Briggs screamed, drawing his saber. "Form up!" Confusion reigned. Dust choked the air, turning the daylight into a brown fog. Horses screamed and reared. Amidst the chaos, Evelyn saw figures moving on the cliffs. They wore feathers, yes, but she saw the glint of sunlight on belt buckles, on heavy boots. Carver's men. They were firing into the column to simulate an attack, to provoke the soldiers into a frenzy of return fire. Charles reached for Evelyn's reins. "Stay close to me." But at that moment, a stick of dynamite, thrown from the heights, detonated on a ledge 20 feet above them. The concussion was deafening. A massive slab of rock sheared off and crashed onto the trail, splitting the column in two. Evelyn's mare, terrified by the blast, reared violently. Charles lost his grip. The horse bolted, not away from the danger, but blindly sideways, toward a steep wash that cut through the canyon floor. Evelyn fought the reins, sawing at the bit, but the animal was mad with fear. The horse scrambled up a loose scree slope, lost its footing, and slid. Evelyn kicked her feet free of the stirrups just as the animal went down. She was thrown clear. Tumbling over the edge of the wash, she fell for what seemed like a long time. She hit the slope, rolled through thorn bushes and sharp rocks, and landed hard on the sandy bottom of a narrow ravine, 30 feet below the fighting. The breath was knocked out of her. The sounds of the battle, the shouting, the gunfire, the bugles sounded distant, muffled by the walls of earth on either side. She lay there, staring up at the slice of sky, gasping for air. Her shoulder throbbed, and her vision swam. She tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness pushed her back down. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard a sound, not the heavy boots of the cavalry, not the chaotic scrambling of the retreat. It was a soft, rhythmic sound, the sound of moccasins on stone. She reached for the pistol at her belt. It was gone, lost in the fall. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the ravine wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. A shadow fell over her. She looked up. Tahoma stood on the rim of the ravine, silhouetted against the sun. He held a rifle loosely in one hand. Behind him stood two other warriors, their faces grim, painted with black streaks of ash. He slid down the embankment, a cloud of dust rising around him. He moved to her, his expression unreadable. "Get away from me," she rasped, her voice weak. He ignored her command. He dropped to one knee beside her, his dark eyes scanning her for injuries. He touched her shoulder, checking the bone. She flinched, but he did not pull away. "The soldier, Briggs, led you into a trap," Tahoma said. His voice was calm, contrasting with the violence echoing above them. "The men shooting from the cliffs are not dying. They are the white thieves." "I know," she whispered. "Then you know you cannot go back up there," he said. "If you return to the soldiers now, in this dust, you will be shot by one side or the other, or the thieves will see you and finish what they started." He pulled a length of rawhide from his belt. Evelyn's eyes widened. "What are you doing? I am taking you," he said. He moved quickly. Before she could fight, he grasped her wrists and bound them together. It was not tight enough to cut the circulation, but it was secure. "You are a prisoner now," he said, pulling her to her feet. "Why?" she demanded, pulling against the rawhide. "You saved me before. Why bind me? Because my men need to see a captive, not a guest," he said in a low voice, leaning close so only she could hear. "And because if your hands are free, you might do something foolish like try to run back to your fiancé, and then I would have to watch you die." He whistled, and a pony was led to the edge of the ravine by one of the other warriors. Tahoma hoisted her up onto the animal's back. He took the lead rope. We rode fast. He commanded the others. "The blue coats will be busy fighting shadows for an hour. By then, we will be in the stone." They moved out, leaving the sounds of the battle behind. Tahoma led them through a labyrinth of slot canyons that Evelyn had never seen. The walls were so high and narrow that the sun rarely touched the bottom. The air was cool and smelled of damp stone and ancient water. They rode in silence, the horses picking their way over rocks that looked impassable. Evelyn swayed in the saddle, exhaustion and pain washing over her. She looked at the back of the man leading her. He rode with a straight spine, his rifle across his lap. He had taken her from the world she knew, from the protection of the army, from the future her father had planned. She was being taken into the heart of the enemy territory. She should have been terrified. She should have been praying. But as the noise of the guns faded completely, replaced by the cry of a hawk echoing off the red walls, she felt something else, a strange clarity. The lie of the town, the lie of the railroad, the lie of Briggs. It was all behind her. Ahead was only the unknown. They rode for hours, climbing higher as the sun began to dip. Finally, they crested a ridge and looked down into a vast, hidden amphitheater of rock. Evelyn gasped. She had expected a war camp. She had expected a grim gathering of warriors sharpening knives, perhaps a few stolen horses. That was what the dime novels described. That was what Charles talked about. Instead, she saw a village, dozens of hogans sturdy. 6-sided dwellings made of logs and earth were scattered across the valley floor. Smoke curled lazily from the smoke holes. Sheep and goats grazed in a green meadow watered by a winding creek. She saw women weaving rugs on large upright looms, their hands moving with practiced rhythm. She saw old men sitting in the shade, smoking pipes. She saw children, dozens of them running, laughing, playing a game with sticks and a hoop. It was peaceful. It was orderly. It was a community. She started, but the words failed her. "It is our house," Tahoma said, looking back at her. "It is what your Major Briggs wants to burn." They began the descent. As they approached the first hogans, the atmosphere changed. The laughter of the children stopped. They froze, staring at the strange woman with pale skin and dust-matted hair. The women at the loom stopped their work. The men stood up, their faces hardening. The silence that greeted them was heavy with hostility. Evelyn felt the weight of 100 stares. She was not a curiosity here. She was an omen. She was the face of the people who were killing them. A tall, elderly man with silver hair and a face like weathered oak stepped out of the largest hogan. He leaned on a staff adorned with eagle feathers. This was Hatali, the medicine man and leader of this band. He spoke in Navajo, his voice sharp and demanding. He pointed a shaking finger at Evelyn, then at the sky where the smoke from the Miller Ranch could likely still be seen. Tahoma dismounted and stood before the elder. He did not bow, but he showed respect. He spoke in their tongue, his voice firm. Evelyn did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. He was explaining. He was defending. The elder spat on the ground near Tahoma's boots. He shouted something that sounded like an accusation. Other warriors gathered around, muttering. They looked at Evelyn with open anger. One young woman stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears and fury, and shouted a word that sounded like enemy. Tahoma turned to Evelyn. He reached up and untied her hands, pulling the rawhide loose. "Get down," he said. She slid off the pony, her legs trembling. She stood beside him, feeling small and exposed in the circle of hostile faces. "They ask why I bring a white woman here," Tahoma said, his eyes scanning the crowd, daring anyone to step closer. "They say you are bad luck. They say you carry the sickness of the white man, the greed. They say I should have left you to the soldiers." "And what did you tell them?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely audible. Tahoma looked at her. For a moment, the hardness in his face softened. "Just a fraction. I told them you are the only white person who knows the truth," he said. "I told them that without you. We are just ghosts waiting to be dispersed. But know this, Evelyn Harper, you are not safe here. You are tolerated. For now." He gestured toward a small, isolated hogan at the edge of the circle. "Go. Stay inside. Do not wander. If you leave the circle of the firelight, I cannot promise what will happen." Evelyn walked toward the small hut, feeling the eyes of the tribe boring into her back. She was caught between two worlds. To the army, she was likely listed as missing, perhaps dead, a martyr to be used to fuel the war. To the Navajo, she was a demon, a symbol of the encroachment that was destroying their lives. She stepped into the cool darkness of the hogan and sank onto the sheepskin rug. She was alone, truly alone. But as she closed her eyes, she saw Tahoma's face as he had cut her bonds. He had defied his own people to bring her here. He had called her the truth. Outside, the sun set, casting long shadows over the valley. The drums began to beat, a low, rhythmic thrumming that felt like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Evelyn Harper, the rancher's daughter, the doctor's assistant, the lady of the parlor, was gone. In her place was a woman sitting in the dark, listening to the song of a people she had been taught to fear, waiting for a dawn that promised only uncertain fire. The first days in the Navajo camp were a lesson in silence and fear. Evelyn was a ghost. She was housed in a small, isolated hogan, a hut made of earth and juniper logs, set apart from the main cluster of family homes. She was not bound, but she was guarded. The Hatali, the elder who had first confronted Tahoma, had agreed to a tense compromise. She was Tahoma's responsibility. She was a guest, but a guest who could not leave. A young boy, barely 10 years old, was assigned to follow her. He carried a small bow and a quiver of blunt arrows, and his eyes were as hard and old as the stones around them. When Evelyn stepped out of the hogan, the life of the village stopped. Women grinding corn would cease their singing, their hands stilling on the metate. They would stare at her, their face blank masks of mistrust, before pulling their children close and turning their backs. She was an omen, the walking symbol of the white world that had brought them only broken treaties and death. Tahoma brought her food twice a day. It was simple. Sparse food, a piece of fire-baked flatbread, a strip of dried venison, a gourd of water. "They fear you," he said, setting the food by the door. "Not entering." "I'm not the one with the guns," Evelyn replied, her voice quiet. "You are the color of the men with the guns," he said. "To them, it is the same. Do not wander past the creek." She was allowed that small freedom. The creek. She would walk to the water's edge, watched by the silent boy, and just sit, listening to the water, feeling the profound, crushing weight of her isolation. On the fourth day, the tenor of the camp changed. A hunting party returned, but they did not carry deer. They carried men. 3 warriors, wounded in the skirmish at the Box Canyon. They had been scouting Briggs' column when Carver's men opened fire, and they had been caught in the crossfire. One man was carried to the central fire, his leg wrapped in a bloody deerskin. His wife was keening. A high, terrible sound of grief. Hatali, the medicine man, began his chant. shaking a rattle and preparing a poultice of pollen and herbs. Evelyn, drawn by the sound, approached the circle. She kept her distance, but she could see the wound clearly. It was a ragged hole from a heavy-caliber rifle, high on the thigh. The skin around it was puffy and had taken on a sickly, greenish tinge. Red streaks were running up the man's leg toward his groin. She knew that sign. She had seen it twice before at her father's clinic. Blood poisoning. "He will die," she said, not realizing she had spoken aloud. Tahoma, who was standing near the elder, turned his head. His eyes narrowed. "The Hata'ali is a great healer. The Hata'ali is praying," Evelyn said, stepping forward, her fear forgotten and replaced by the sharp authority she had learned from her father. "That wound is poisoned. If you do not clean it, he will be dead before the moon is high." The Hata'ali stopped his chant. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with fury. He shouted something in Navajo, pointing his rattle at her. "He says the white woman brings death and then dares to speak of it." Tahoma translated, his voice tense. "Tell him the white woman can stop it," Evelyn said, meeting the elder's gaze. "Tell him my father is a doctor. I have seen this. I know what to do. You must let me try, or you must watch him die. It is your choice." The camp was utterly silent. The wounded man groaned, a low, wet sound. His wife looked from the Hata'ali to Evelyn, her face a mask of desperation. Tahoma spoke to the elder for a long minute, his voice low and urgent. Hata'ali listened, his face like carved granite. Finally, he gave a short, sharp nod and stepped back, gesturing with his hand. It was not an agreement. It was permission to fail. "What do you need?" Tahoma asked. "Boiling water, clean cloth, as clean as you have. And your knife," she said. He gave her his knife, hilt first. She pushed the blade into the heart of the fire until it glowed red, sterilizing it. She washed her hands in the creek, scrubbing them with sand until they were raw. When the water boiled, she began. She ignored the stares, the mutters. She knelt by the warrior. "Tell him this will hurt," she said to Tahoma. "Tell him to be strong." She laid open the wound with the hot knife. The smell of that rose was terrible. The man screamed, a sound that tore through the valley, but Tahoma and another warrior held him down. Evelyn did not flinch. She pressed and drained the wound, washing it again and again with the boiling water, cutting away the dead, green flesh. She packed it with a poultice of crushed willow bark, an herb she knew would fight the fever. She bound it tightly with clean strips of cotton. When she was done, she was covered in sweat and blood. She sat back on her heels, exhausted. Hata'ali watched her, his face unreadable, and then he walked away. She tended the man for 2 days, forcing water between his lips, changing the dressing. On the 3rd morning, his fever broke. He opened his eyes and asked for food. Hata'ali came to her hogan. He did not speak. He simply placed a small buckskin pouch of dried herbs at her door and walked away. It was a sign of respect. The true thaw came not from a warrior, but from a child. A little girl, perhaps 5 years old, fell ill with a fever that choked her breath. Evelyn heard the child's hacking cough through the night. She went to the family's hogan, uninvited. The mother, a woman who had glared at her with pure hatred, stood aside to let her in. Evelyn recognized the shallow, rapid breathing, the heat radiating from the child's small body. Lung fever. She sat with the child for 2 nights and 2 days. She brewed a tea from herbs the Hata'ali had left for her. She created a steam tent over the child with hot rocks and juniper boughs, forcing the moisture into her lungs. She bathed her in cool water, whispering stories her own mother had told her. On the 3rd morning, the little girl, whose name was Little Bird, sat up and drank a full cup of broth. The mother looked at Evelyn, her hard eyes filled with tears, and touched her hand. The camp changed. The stares did not stop, but they were no longer filled with hate. Now, they held a grudging curiosity, even respect. She was no longer the enemy. She was the healer. That evening, Tahoma came to her hogan. He did not just drop the food. He sat by the small fire she had built outside her door. The young boy who had guarded her was gone. "The Hata'ali says you have strong medicine," Tahoma said, staring into the flames. "It is not medicine," Evelyn said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the desert chill. "It is knowledge." They sat in silence for a time. The sky was a deep, impossible purple, studded with stars so bright they looked like holes punched in the night. "My father was in a war," Evelyn said softly. "The Great War, between the North and the South. He was a doctor. He spent 4 years sewing men together. He said they were all just boys, dressed in blue or gray. He said white men are very good at killing other white men." Tahoma looked at her, surprised. He, like his people, had always seen the white invaders as a single, unified force. He hated it. Evelyn continued. "He hated the killing. That is why he came here. He wanted peace." Tahoma nodded slowly. "My war was different. I was young when the soldiers first came in great numbers. They spoke of peace. They hired me as a scout. I was proud. I spoke their language. I wore their blue coat." His voice grew hard, the muscle in his jaw tightening. "I trusted them. I showed them the high passes. I led them to the hidden springs, and they used that knowledge to hunt us. They rounded up my people like cattle and marched us 300 miles to a place called Bosque Redondo. We call it the Long Walk." He picked up a stick and drew a line in the dust. "My grandmother died on that walk. My sister's child, born on the trail, died 2 days later. We were kept there for 4 years. The land was bad. The water was poisonous. We starved. When they finally let us come home, half of our people were gone." He snapped the stick in two and threw it into the fire. "I came back here to protect what is left. I will not let them take this last valley." I look at you, and part of me sees the woman who healed Little Bird, but part of me sees the face of the soldiers who lied. Trusting you, Evelyn Harper. It feels like a betrayal of my grandmother's bones." Evelyn felt a profound ache in her chest. His pain was so much older and deeper than her own. "I'm not them. Tahoma, I am not Major Briggs." "I know," he said, his voice rough. "That is the problem. It was easier when the enemy had one face. The fragile peace of the camp was set against the rising tension of the outside world." A few days later, a Navajo scout, one who often passed as a trader in Red Rock, returned with news. The town was in an uproar. Major Briggs had returned, claiming a great victory, reporting that his column had been ambushed by a massive war party. He listed his dead and wounded, and he reported that Evelyn Harper, the rancher's daughter, had been captured and likely killed. A funeral service was planned. "They are calling you a martyr," Tahoma told her, his face grim. "Briggs is using your death to demand more soldiers." "My father," Evelyn whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "My brother. They think I am dead. They are grieving," Tahoma said, "and the major is turning their grief into rage. He is getting his war." The news from the town solidified her position in the camp, but it also created new tensions. Tahoma was the war leader of this band, the one they looked to for strategy, and he was spending his evenings speaking with the white woman. Evelyn saw the looks. A young woman who had lost her husband in a skirmish last year, one who clearly admired Tahoma, would bring him his food, only to see him sitting by Evelyn's fire. The woman's eyes would flash with a jealousy that was sharp and painful. Other warriors muttered among themselves. Was their leader being softened? Was he being fooled by a white woman? Just as he had been fooled by the blue coats all those years ago, Tahoma felt the pressure. But he also knew Evelyn was the key. He had to make her understand exactly what was at stake. One afternoon, when the Hatali had given his formal permission, Tahoma took her from the camp. They rode for an hour, deeper into the canyon system, until they emerged into a place of breathtaking beauty. It was a high, protected valley, a perfect circle of stone. A spring flowed from the base of the cliff, creating a pool of water so clear it looked like green glass. The grass grew thick. "This is the source," Tahoma said, dismounting. "The water that feeds the entire valley. The water for our sheep, our corn, our children." He led her to the base of the cliffs. At first, she saw nothing but cracks in the rock. Then, looking closer, she saw there were ledges, high up, and on those ledges were bundles wrapped in blankets and hidden. "Our ancestors," Tahoma said, his voice low with reverence. "My grandfather is up there, his father before him. When we die, we are returned to the stone. This is where our spirits live. This is where our people began." He pulled a folded piece of canvas from his saddlebag. He unrolled it. It was a surveyor's map. Evelyn recognized the precise, neat handwriting. It was Charles's map. Tahoma pointed. A thick black line, labeled Proposed Rail Route, slashed directly through the center of the oasis. It cut straight through the sacred pool. It ran directly beneath the ancestral burial ledges. "This is your railroad," Tahoma said, his voice vibrating with a cold fury. "To make this pass, they will use dynamite. They will blast the cliffs. They will scatter the bones of my ancestors to lay their iron tracks. They will drain the spring to feed their steam engines. They will kill our past, and they will steal our future." Evelyn stared at the map, horrified. "They cannot know," she whispered. "Charles, he would not if he understood what this place is. He does not care." Tahoma cut her off. "Or he is too weak to care. This is why we must fight. This is why we must meet their dynamite with our arrows. We must make them fear this land so much they leave it." "No," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but firm. "No, that is what Briggs wants. He is trying to make you fight. If you attack, you prove him right. You give him the excuse he needs to bring in the whole army. You will be the savages he claims you are." Then what he demanded, turning on her. "We let them. We choke on the dust of our grandfather's bones. We fight with the truth," she insisted, meeting his angry gaze. "It is the only weapon they do not expect. We have to find proof. Proof that Carver's men attacked the stagecoach. Proof that they were the ones who burned the Miller Ranch. If we can prove that Major Briggs planned it, that he is a murderer, not a soldier, even his government will not be able to ignore that. It is the only way. Tahoma, your war will get you all killed. My truth might get us all justice." He stared at her, two worlds colliding in the sacred silence. He saw the fire in her eyes, the fierce belief. It was the same fire he had seen in the eyes of his own warriors, but her path was one he had never considered. That night, there was a ceremony for the warriors who had died in the ambush. It was a somber, mournful gathering. Evelyn stood at the edge of the firelight, her head bowed. She did not understand the words of the chant, but she understood the sound of grief. She watched the family weep, and she felt the same loss she had felt when her own mother died. After, as the camp settled into a deep quiet, Tahoma found her. He was covered in ceremonial ash, his face a mask of sorrow. "You stayed," he said. "I was paying my respects," she replied. "They were brave men, caught in a lie." She saw his hand. There was a long, deep cut across his palm, dripping blood. He had gashed it on a rock during the ride back from the sacred valley and had ignored it. "You are a warrior," she said, her voice suddenly sharp with the authority of a doctor's daughter. "But you are a fool about your own care." "Let me see that," before he could protest. She took his hand. A jolt, like lightning, passed between them at the touch. His hand was rough, strong, covered in calluses and scars. Her hand was small against his, but her grip was firm. She led him to the light of her fire. Neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, charged with a new, dangerous energy. This was not the necessary touch of healing a lip, or the clinical touch of saving a warrior. This was a choice. She took her cup of precious clean water and poured it over the wound. He did not flinch. She tore a strip of cloth from her own petticoat, the last remnant of her old life, and began to wrap the wound tightly. Her fingers brushed his skin. He did not pull away. He watched her face, the way the firelight caught the curve of her cheek and the earnest line of her brow. He saw the strength in her, the compassion. He saw a woman. She finished the knot, her fingers lingering for just a moment on his wrist. "Thank you," he said. The words meant more than just the bandage. "You are welcome," she whispered. He held her gaze for a long, breathless moment, then turned and walked into the darkness of the camp. But the air had changed, crackling between them. The wall of history and skin and prejudice that stood between them had just begun to crumble. The fragile bond that had formed over bandages and fevers was shattered by the arrival of a scout. He was a young man named Kla, who had ridden for 2 days, and he fell from his horse, his body slick with sweat and his eyes wide with fear. He brought the news to the Hatali and Tahoma, who were gathered with the other elders around the central fire. "Briggs has his men," Kla gasped. Speaking in Navajo, "He has more. 3 new cavalry companies from Fort Wingate. He is telling everyone the story of the Miller Ranch. And he is telling them that the great war party that attacked him in the canyon has captured the white woman. Evelyn Harper, Evelyn, who had been drawn by the commotion, stood at the edge of the circle. She could not understand the words, but she saw the way every eye in the camp turned to her, the newfound respect of the past weeks evaporating, replaced by the original, cold hatred. "What is it?" she asked, walking toward Tahoma. He did not look at her. He was watching Hatali's face. "He is launching his war," Tahoma said, his voice flat and dead. "He is massing his troops at your father's ranch. He says he is coming here to rescue you." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face. "To rescue me, but that is the perfect excuse. It is the one thing that will make everyone support him. He will come here and kill you all in my name." "Yes," Tahoma said. "No," she said, her mind racing. "No, I will not let that happen. I have to go back. I have to stop him." She turned to the circle of grim faces. "Tahoma, tell them I can stop this. If I ride back to my father's ranch, if I stand in front of them all, Briggs, my father, Charles, and I tell them I was not captured, they will have to listen. The lie will be exposed. He will have no reason to attack." Tahoma finally looked at her. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were burning with a cold fire. "You are a fool." The words struck her like a slap. "You believe that," he continued, his voice low and dangerous. "You believe your words. The words of one woman will stop 200 soldiers who have been promised blood. You believe your father, who told you to be silent. You believe your fiancé. Who helped plan this? He is not my fiancé," she snapped. "Not anymore. And my father was scared. But he will not be scared enough to let his own daughter be used as an excuse for a massacre. He is a good man. There are no good men in a war they are determined to start," Tahoma said. He stepped closer to her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "They will not listen to you. Evelyn Harper. They will say you are crazy. They will say you are a traitor who has fallen in love with a savage. They will lock you up and use your "or rescue" as a battle cry. Your truth is a child's wish. The only thing your people understand is this." He touched the handle of the knife at his belt. "You are wrong," she whispered, her voice shaking with her own fury. "You are just as blind as they are. You see my skin, and you see an enemy. After all this, after I healed your people, after I listened to your story, you still do not trust me. Trust," he laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Trust is what killed my grandmother. I trust that you believe what you are saying, and I trust that your belief is naive. You do not understand what is at stake. This is not a parlor debate. This is our land, our children, our bones. We will fight for it. We will not wait for your words to fail." He turned his back on her. Speaking to the Hatali in rapid Navajo, he was outlining a defense. He was preparing for a war she knew they could not win. Evelyn backed away, her heart hammering. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. She looked at the faces in the camp. She saw Little Bird, the child she had saved, playing by her mother's hogan. She saw the wife of the warrior whose legs she had cleaned. If she stayed here, these people would die. If Tahoma fought, they would be slaughtered. Briggs would get his war, and her name would be the reason. Her conscience and the ticking clock of the approaching cavalry pressed down on her. She was trapped, but she was a Harper. She was the daughter of a man who, despite his fear, had taught her what was right. She would not be a silent excuse for murder. That night, the camp was heavy with a terrible, fearful energy. Warriors cleaned their rifles. Women sharpened axes, and the Hatali began a protection chant that would last until dawn. Evelyn lay in her hogan, her eyes wide open in the dark. Tahoma's words echoed in her head. "You are a fool." Maybe she was, but she had to try. She waited until the moon was down, in the blackest hour just before dawn. The chanting and the drums had finally subsided, leaving the camp in an exhausted, tense silence. She crept from her hogan. She was not a warrior. Her movements felt clumsy, loud. Every rustle of her skirt sounded like a gunshot. She moved toward the horse enclosure, a small corral of juniper branches where the best mounts were kept. She knew Tahoma's horse, the lean pinto. She would not take that one, but next to it was a solid bay mare, fast but quiet. Her hands were shaking. She fumbled with the rawhide loop that served as a gate. "What are you doing?" The voice, a child's, made her jump so hard she nearly cried out. It was the boy who had first guarded her. He stood in the shadows, holding his small bow. Evelyn's mind raced. "I heard a noise. I thought a coyote was near the horses." The boy's eyes, ancient and knowing, stared at her. He did not believe her. He looked from her to the horse, then back to her. He raised his bow, not to shoot, but in a silent question. "Please," Evelyn whispered, her voice breaking. "They are coming to kill you. They are coming to kill everyone because of me. I am the only one who can stop it. Please, let me go." She held her breath. The boy stood there for a long, agonizing moment. Then, with a sigh that seemed too old for his small body, he lowered the bow. He did not help her, but he did not raise the alarm. He simply turned and vanished into the darkness. She had her permission. She untied the mare, led it 100 yards from the camp, and pulled herself onto its bare back. She had no saddle, only a handful of mane and a single rope hackamore. She kicked the horse's flanks and prayed. The mare lunged forward, and Evelyn rode out of the canyon, a lone, desperate figure fleeing into the dark, in his hogan. Tahoma was not asleep. He was sitting, his rifle across his knees, listening to the sounds of the night. He had felt her decision in the silence of their argument. He had known she would try. When he heard the faint, muffled hoofbeats of a single horse moving fast, his fears were confirmed. He stepped outside. The boy was standing there. "She is gone," the boy said. She said she was going to stop the soldiers. A cold rage filled Tahoma, not at her, but at the world that had forced this, at her innocence, at his own weakness for letting her get close. He had been right. She would be a fool, and her foolishness would get her killed. And when she was found, her body riddled with bullets, every man in Red Rock would say the Navajo had done it. Her escape was not an act of peace. It was an act of war. "Bring my horse," he said to the boy, his voice a low growl. "The Pinto. Ride to Hatali. Tell him I have gone to retrieve our truth. Tell him to prepare for the worst." He was on his horse in less than a minute. He did not need to see her trail. He knew where she was going. He rode with a reckless speed, his heart a cold knot of anger and a deeper, more terrible feeling he refused to name: fear. He was afraid for her. The sky in the east was beginning to pale from black to a sick, gray-yellow when the wind started. It began as a whisper, a sigh through the canyons, but it grew quickly. It picked up sand, then pebbles. By the time the sun was fully risen, it was a howling gale, a sandstorm. Evelyn was caught in the open desert, miles from the ranch. The world vanished in a wall of brown. The wind tore at her hair, whipping it across her face, stinging her eyes. The sand cut at her skin like tiny knives. Her horse whinnied, turning its back to the wind, refusing to move. "Go!" Evelyn screamed, kicking it, pulling the rope. "We have to go." She was blind, lost, and terrified. The horse moved, but it was a stumbling, hesitant walk. She had no idea which way she was facing. Tahoma, tracking her, saw the storm as an ally. He knew this land. He tied a cloth over his face and rode into the maelstrom, his head low, letting the horse feel its way. He could taste the grit, but he could also smell the trail, the fear of her horse, the scent of the white woman. He was closing the distance. Evelyn broke out of the worst of it like a swimmer surfacing for air. The wind was still shrieking, but the thickest part of the storm was behind her, and she saw it. Through the brown haze, the outline of her father's barn. Lights, horses, dozens of them. The cavalry. She spurred her tired mare into a desperate, stumbling gallop. She rode right into the center of the ranch yard, skidding to a halt. Every man there froze. Major Briggs, standing on the porch. Charles, beside him, holding a new rifle. Her father, his face gray and broken, holding a medical bag. And Jesse, his gun belt strapped on, his face a mask of rage. They stared at her as if she were a ghost. She was covered in dirt, her lips split again, her dress torn, her hair wild. "Evelyn," her father whispered, taking a step, his hand outstretched. "My God, you're alive! She is here!" Charles shouted, a wave of relief and triumph in his voice. "She is safe. They let her go." I was not let go, Evelyn said, her voice raw and loud. Carrying over the wind, she slid from the horse and stood before them, shaking but defiant. I was never a captive. You cannot do this. Briggs' face darkened. He stepped down from the porch. Miss Harper, you are hysterical. The savages have done something to your mind. Men, take hold of her. Get her inside. No, Evelyn screamed, backing away. He is lying. Major Briggs is a murderer. He hired Luke Carver to attack the stagecoach. He hired him to burn the Miller Ranch. He is doing this to steal the Navajo land for the railroad. The world stopped. The soldiers stared. Dr. Harper looked like he might collapse. Evelyn, hush. In God's name. What are you saying? It is the truth. Father, I heard him. I heard him in the saloon, planning it with Charles. All eyes went to Charles. He wilted, his face ashen. She is not well. She is confused. Evelyn, please, you are safe now. Just come inside. He reached for her, his hand trembling. Do not touch me, she spat, shoving his hand away. He stumbled back, his face crumpling, his public pride shattered by her rejection. Seize her, Briggs bellowed. She is a traitor. She is conspiring with the enemy. He stopped. His hand went to the pistol at his belt. Every soldier turned. A figure had emerged from the wall of sand. He sat on a lathered pinto, as still as the stone of the mesas. A lone warrior, his rifle held across his lap, his face a hard mask of implacable fury. Tahoma. He had come for her. The yard was so quiet Evelyn could hear the grit scraping on the roof. It was a tableau of hate, 200 guns aimed at one man. Tahoma's eyes did not go to Briggs. They did not go to the soldiers. They found Evelyn. He looked at her, and in his gaze she saw 1,000 things: anger that she had been right, frustration that she had been a fool, and a fierce, terrifying protectiveness that stunned her. Briggs smiled, a slow, ugly twisting of his lips. Well, the chief himself. It seems the rescue was a success after all. Men, take him. I want him alive. No, Evelyn screamed, running to stand between Tahoma and the soldiers. Get out of the way. Miss Harper, Briggs snarled. She said, leave her be, a new voice cracked. Jesse, her brother, his face pale, had his Winchester leveled. Not at Tahoma, but at Major Briggs. That was all it took, the moment of hesitation. Briggs, seeing the mutiny, lunged for Evelyn, but Tahoma was already moving. He spurred the pinto. It was not a charge, it was a bolt of lightning. He was beside her, his powerful arm circling her waist, pulling her from the ground and onto the saddle in front of him. Fire, fire, damn you, Briggs roared. The yard exploded in a volley of gunfire. Bullets snapped the air around them. Tahoma wheeled the horse, the pinto rearing, and kicked it. He did not ride away. He rode back into the howling brown curtain of the sandstorm. Evelyn clung to him, her face buried in his chest, the sound of the wind and the guns and her own heart roaring in her ears. She felt the impact as a bullet grazed the horse's rump, but the animal did not falter. They plunged into the darkness of the storm. The shouting and the gunshots were instantly muffled, swallowed by the wind. They were gone. The soldiers fired blindly into the wall of dust, but they were shooting at ghosts. Nature itself had come to their rescue. The sandstorm raged for 2 hours, a howling wall of grit that scoured the land and erased their trail. They huddled in a shallow rock crevice, the pinto horse groaning at their feet. The animal was hurt, a deep gash from a soldier's bullet in its rump. Tahoma had pressed a wad of herbs into the wound, but the horse was weakening. We cannot stay here, Evelyn said, her voice hoarse from the dust. And he cannot carry us both. He will not carry either of us, Tahoma said, looking at the animal with deep sadness. He stroked the pinto's neck, whispering something in Navajo. He then drew his knife. Evelyn looked away, squeezing her eyes shut. She did not look back until she heard the sound of him wiping the blade clean on the sand. They were on foot. Fugitives. Briggs will have every soldier in the territory hunting us, Evelyn said, her voice shaking. He will hunt for you, Tahoma corrected her, his face grim. He will hunt for the white woman abducted by a savage. He will find you, and he will kill me, and he will be a hero for it. They walked for hours, climbing into the broken, rocky highlands where a horse could not follow, the wind still howling at their backs. Just before sunset, A shadow detached itself from the rocks above them. It was Claw, the young scout. He had tracked them from the ranch, his face a mask of urgency. He spoke in rapid Navajo, his words tumbling over each other. Evelyn did not need a translation. She could see the panic in his eyes. "What is it?" she demanded. Tahoma's face was ashen. "Briggs is not just hunting. He's finishing the job. He has lost face. Your brother pulling a gun on him. You escaping. He is a madman. He is not waiting for more troops. He is moving his main force to blockade the canyon. But they cannot get into the sacred valley," Evelyn said. "You said the path was hidden." "They do not need the path," Tahoma said, his voice deadly quiet. "Claw says a special train has left Red Rock. It is not a passenger train. It is guarded by Carver's men and railroad bulls. It carries one thing, black powder, dynamite, enough to bring down the cliffs. He is not going to just take the valley. He is going to destroy it." Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs, the spring, the burial ledges, the maps. Charles. This was the final, monstrous step. All their arguments about truth versus war, about words versus arrows, they were all meaningless. The dynamite would arrive before any truth could be traveled. "We cannot stop 200 soldiers," she said, her mind racing. "But a train is just a machine." Tahoma looked at her, a new, sharp light in his eyes. He had been a warrior, preparing for a war. She was a doctor's daughter, seeing a sickness and a single, precise way to cut it out. "It is a machine," he agreed, "and all machines have a weakness." "We need help," she said. "We cannot do this alone." "I have 4 men I trust," Tahoma said. "They are watching the canyon. Claw can bring them. But it is not enough. The train will be guarded." "I have one," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "My brother, Jesse." He pulled a gun on Briggs. He chose a side. He will help. This was the moment, the balance of everything. Tahoma stared at her, the old mistrust warring with the new, desperate reality. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire he had seen in the sacred valley. He made his choice. How, he asked. "Claw must ride to the ranch," Evelyn said. She pulled a small, silver locket from her neck. It had been her mother's. "Give this to Jesse. Only to Jesse. Tell him to meet at the Serpent's Tooth, the pass where the track climbs. Tell him to come at midnight, and tell him to bring every rifle and every box of cartridges he can carry." Tahoma translated. Claw nodded, his face grim. He took the locket, a strange, holy relic of the white world, and vanished back into the twilight. "And now?" Evelyn asked. "Now," Tahoma said, pulling his rifle into his lap, "we become shadows, and we pray your brother is as strong as you believe him to be." They moved through the night, a 3-hour forced march, until they reached the high pass. The railroad tracks glittered a faint, cold silver in the starlight. Below them, a mile down the track, a massive trestle bridge spanned a 200-foot deep gorge. The plan was not to destroy the train. It was to steal the dynamite. "The track climbs steeply here," Evelyn whispered, her breath pluming in the cold. "The train will be moving slow, slower than a man can walk. If we can board it, we do not need the whole train," Tahoma said, pointing, "just the car with the dynamite. We uncouple it, we let it roll back, and it will go over the bridge," Evelyn asked, horrified. "No," Tahoma said, "it will be too slow. There is a sandy wash about 200 yards back. If we time it right, it will derail there. The dynamite will be safe, but useless to Briggs." A flicker of movement in the rocks below. It was Jesse. He was not alone. He had Claw, and 3 other men with him, Tahoma's warriors. They had all arrived together. Jesse scrambled up the rocks, his arms loaded with rifles. He was pale, but his eyes were set. "Evelyn," he breathed, dropping the rifles. I thought he had you." "He did," Evelyn said, pulling her brother into a fierce, one-armed hug. "He saved me." Jesse looked at Tahoma. He did not offer his hand, but he nodded. "The train left Red Rock an hour ago. It is heavy. It will be here in 20 minutes. Pa is safe. He is drinking with the soldiers, telling them war stories. He is a better actor than I thought." "How many guards?" Tahoma asked. "I counted 10, Jesse said. "Railroad men and Carver's men. Mean, all of them." The night was cold. The whistle of the train echoed up the pass. a long, mournful cry in the dark. "Jesse, you and Clow will be up here," Evelyn commanded, her voice surprisingly steady. "You have the best rifles. You will provide covering fire. You will watch our backs. Do not shoot to kill unless you must. Shoot to make them keep their heads down." Tahoma looked at her, a flicker of surprised respect in his eyes. She was not a prisoner. She was a general. "The rest of us," Tahoma said, "will be on the train. We get to the dynamite car. We pull the pin. We jump. We do not stop until it is done." The train appeared, a single bright eye cutting the darkness, its smokestack belching red cinders. It was moving agonizingly slow, the engine straining against the grade. The clatter of the wheels was deafening. Tahoma, his face set, led the charge. He and his 3 warriors ran alongside, shadows in the smoke, and leaped, grabbing the iron rungs of the boxcars. They were ghosts, climbing to the roof. The first shot came from Jesse, a guard on the caboose, leaning out, had seen them. Jesse's bullet splintered the wood over his head, and the man yelped, falling back inside. The fight began. Tahoma ran along the roof, the car swaying beneath him, the wind tearing at his shirt. A guard rose up from behind a water barrel, leveling a shotgun. Tahoma was too fast. He threw his knife, a clean, underhand throw. The man grunted, dropping the shotgun, and fell. Evelyn watched, her heart in her throat. Jesse firing a steady rhythm beside her. "They are in the dynamite car," she shouted. Tahoma and another warrior were at the coupling, a heavy iron pin. It was rusted. They were struggling. "We have to help them," Evelyn said. "Stay here," Jesse yelled. But a new threat appeared. A rifleman, one of Carver's men, had crawled onto the roof of the tender, just behind the engine. He had a clear shot. He was bracing his rifle, taking careful aim at Tahoma's exposed back. "Jesse!" The tender, Evelyn screamed. Jesse fired, but the angle was bad. The bullet pinging off the iron. He is going to kill him. Evelyn did not think. She grabbed one of the spare rifles. It was heavy, the stock unfamiliar in her hands. She had shot at targets, at rabbits. She had never shot at a human being. She saw the man's profile against the fire of the smokestack. She saw Tahoma, straining at the pin. She lifted the rifle, her hands shaking so hard she could barely see the sight. She took a breath. She remembered her father's words. "Do not pull the trigger. Squeeze it." She squeezed. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, the sound of it lost in the noise of the train. On the tender. The man jerked. His rifle fired into the sky. He stood up, a look of strange surprise on his face, and then he toppled sideways, vanishing from the train, tumbling into the gorge below. Evelyn stared, her hands frozen to the rifle. She felt sick. She felt powerful. Tahoma did not see it. He had put his back into the pin. With a final, desperate heave, he and his warrior pulled it free. "It is loose," he roared, waving his arm. The dynamite car, its momentum lost, groaned. A gap of black night opened between it and the rest of the train. It was working. Jump Tahoma yelled to his men. He and his warriors leaped from the train, rolling down the sandy embankment. Jesse grabbed Evelyn, pulling her back into the shadows. The train, lighter now, began to pick up speed, chugging toward the trestle bridge, the lone dynamite car. However, slowed. It stopped, and then, slowly, it began to roll backwards. It gathered speed, the wheels shrieking. A runaway monster. It hit the wash at 30 miles an hour, the car jumping the tracks and crashing onto its side, burying itself in the deep sand. A cloud of dust and splintered wood rose in the night. It was done. They had won, but the victory was short-lived. The train screeched to a halt on the far side of the bridge. Shouts and lanterns. They knew what had happened. "We have to move," Tahoma said, grabbing Evelyn's arm. "Now. Every man in that valley will be hunting us by sunrise." They ran. They ran for their lives, climbing back into the high, cold rocks. They were outlaws, traitors. They were a band of Navajo warriors, a half-wild rancher's son, and a woman who had just killed a man. The temperature plummeted. The desert, so hot by day, was now freezing. The wind had returned, a high, thin wail that cut through their clothes. Evelyn was shaking. Her shoulder where the rifle had kicked her was a throbbing bruise. She had another wound. A long, stinging graze on her arm from where a stray bullet, or perhaps a rock from the derailment, had cut her. "Here," Tahoma said, pulling them to a halt. In here. It was a cave, a hollow in the rock, barely deep enough to be called shelter, but it was out of the wind. Jesse and the other warriors, exhausted, huddled together in the back, sharing a blanket. They were asleep in minutes. Evelyn and Tahoma sat at the mouth, guarding the entrance, a tiny, smokeless fire of dry scrub between them. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only the cold and the bone-deep weariness. Evelyn was shivering. It was not just the cold. It was the image of the man falling, the shock, the terror, the strange, cold victory. Tahoma looked at her. He saw the tremor in her hands. He saw the dark, wet stain on her sleeve. "You are hurt," he said. He did not ask. He gently pushed the torn fabric aside. The cut was long, from her elbow to her shoulder, but shallow. It was bleeding sluggishly. "It is nothing," she whispered. He shook his head. He took his canteen and poured a little of their precious water onto a clean strip of cloth. His hands, calloused and strong, were impossibly gentle. He washed the grit from the wound. His fingers brushed her skin. She did not pull away. She watched his face in the flickering firelight. She saw the exhaustion. She saw the cut on his own cheek. She saw the man who had run across a train roof for his people, and the man who had ridden into a yard full of rifles for her. The realization hit her with the force of the rifle's kick. It was not gratitude. It was not an admiration. She loved this man, this fierce, broken, beautiful man who was the enemy of her world and the savior of her soul. The thought was so big, so dangerous. It terrified her more than the fall, more than the guns. She began to shake, a deep, uncontrollable trembling. Tahoma finished the bandage, his hands lingering on her arm. He felt the tremor. He thought it was the cold, or the wound. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and luminous in the dark, filled with 1,000 fears. Fear of the night, of the soldiers, of the man she had killed, but most of all, fear of this new, impossible, breaking feeling in her chest. She whispered, the words so soft he barely heard them over the wind. "Don't hurt me." He went very still. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and he understood. He understood she was not talking about the graze, or the cold. She was talking about her heart. She was talking about the chasm between them. A slow smile, the first she had ever truly seen from him, touched the corners of his mouth. It was a smile of such warmth, of such profound understanding. It stopped her breath. He leaned close, his voice a low, warm rumble that vibrated through her. "Only love touches you tonight." He did not kiss her. The promise was too new, too fragile. He simply took his own heavy blanket and draped it around her shoulders, and then around his own, pulling her close against his side. The warmth of his body seeped into hers, solid and real. They sat there, two fugitives, two allies, two worlds pressed together as one, watching the cold stars. Just before she fell into an exhausted, dreamless sleep, she felt his hand find hers. She heard him whisper something, very softly, in the language of the mountains and the wind. She did not know the words, but she felt their meaning. It was the sound of a man choosing his fate. It was the sound of a man who had found his home, right there, in the heart of the storm. Evelyn woke to the gray light of dawn. For a long, disoriented moment, she did not know where she was. She was not in her bed at the ranch. She was not in the hogan. She was on a cold stone floor, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of horse, sand, and the man beside her. Tahoma was already awake. He was not beside her. He was at the mouth of the cave, a rifle across his knees, a silhouette against the pale, bruised sky. He was watching the valley below. She sat up, and the blanket pooled in her lap. The cold hit her instantly. The events of the night rushed back: the train, the rifle, the man falling, the terror, the escape, and the promise. Only love touches you tonight. Jesse and the other warriors were stirring, groaning as they sat up, their joints stiff from the cold. Jesse looked at his sister, his face etched with a new, somber maturity. He had seen her kill a man. He had fought alongside Navajo warriors. The boy who had left the ranch was gone. Evelyn's gaze went back to Tahoma. He turned his head, his eyes meeting hers across the small, dead fire. The air between them was charged. Everything had changed, and nothing had changed. They were still fugitives. They were still two different worlds, but the wall between those worlds was gone, burned away by the heat of their shared fight and the quiet truth of his words. There was an awkwardness, the shyness of two people who had shared something profound without a name, but beneath it was a bedrock of certainty. They were no longer just allies. Jesse saw the look. He saw the way his sister looked at the warrior, and the way the warrior's gaze softened when it rested on her. He turned away, pretending to check his rifle, his face flushing. "We must move," Tahoma said, his voice quiet. But it was not an order for a prisoner. It was a statement to a partner. The hunt has begun. They made their way back to the camp, a small, exhausted band of ghosts. The journey was tense, every shadow a threat, every gust of wind the sound of approaching cavalry. When they arrived, the village was in a state of quiet panic, the people preparing to flee. But the warriors who had been with them, Kla and the others, ran ahead, and the story spread through the camp like wildfire. They told of the train, of the black powder, of the impossible fight. They told how the white woman had fought with them, how she had taken up a rifle and saved their war chief from a sniper's bullet. Evelyn was no longer just the healer. She was a warrior. This new respect was, in its own way, more dangerous than the hatred had been. It made her real. It made her a part of them, and that, to many, was a threat. Evelyn saw it in the eyes of Najoni, the young widow who had long hoped to be Tahoma's wife. Najoni had brought Tahoma his morning meal for a year, that morning. She brought the bowl, her face proud, only to see him walk directly to Evelyn, checking the bandage on her arm before he took the food. Najoni's face crumpled. The hatred she now aimed at Evelyn was not that of an enemy. It was the raw, deep hatred of a woman scorned. The rumors flew. The war chief had taken a white woman. He had shared his blanket with her. He was turning his back on his people. Hatali, the old medicine man, understood the danger. He called a council. This was not a trial. It was a reckoning. They gathered in the large ceremonial hogan, the air thick with smoke and tension. Evelyn sat on the floor, Tahoma at her side. Jesse, impossibly, had been invited to sit as well, as a warrior who had fought with them. The Hatali spoke, his voice like rocks grinding together. Tahoma translated for Evelyn, his voice low. "He honors your deeds. You healed our children. You saved our sacred valley from the black powder. You fought as one of us, but he says you have brought a new danger." The elder looked at Evelyn. "You are the daughter of the rancher. You are the promise of the railroad man. Now, you sit by our war chief as if you were his woman. This has never been. This is a sickness. The soldiers will not just hunt us for the land now. They will hunt us to reclaim you. They will say we have stolen and corrupted a white woman. You have given Briggs a reason that his own people will understand." Another elder spoke. "You are a white woman. You do not know our ways. You will long for your soft bed, for your own people. You will leave him. You will break him. You will bring the curse of the white world into our homes." The silence was heavy. This was the true fight, not against Briggs, but against history, against 1,000 years of prejudice. Evelyn rose to her feet. She was shaking, but she did not let it show in her voice. "Tahoma," she said, "tell them." He nodded, and she spoke. "I cannot tell you that I am not afraid. I am. I do not know your ways, and you do not know mine. I have seen my world. I have seen what it offers. It offers me a man like Charles Whitmore, who will trade my life for his career. It offers me a man like Major Briggs, who will murder my neighbors for profit." She looked at the Hatali, her eyes clear. "You ask if I will miss the comforts of the white world. I tell you, that world is not comfortable. It is a world of lies, and I will not live in it." She paused, then took a breath. "The Hatali asks if I am prepared to leave my life. I am, because my life is here." She looked at Tahoma. "Freedom does not have a different color for each person, and love does not either. I have chosen. I stand with this man. I stand on this land." The hogan was silent. Tahoma stood. "She is right," he said in his own tongue, his voice ringing with authority. We stop the dynamite, but they will send more. We cannot win by hiding. We must stop the man. We must use the truth she has brought us. Truth, Hatali scoffed. They have no truth. They have paper, Evelyn said, her voice urgent. The orders, the maps, the proof that Briggs is a murderer. It is in Red Rock, in Charles's office. It is a fortress, Tahoma said. The town is full of soldiers. I will go, Jesse said, standing up. They know my face. I am just a rancher's son. I can slip in. I can know, Evelyn said. You cannot. Charles will never give the papers to you. He will give them to me. I am the only one he might listen to. I have to be the one to ask. You are a ghost, Tahoma argued, his voice harsh with fear. They think you are dead. If you are seen, you will be shot as a traitor. I will not allow it. You do not command me, Evelyn said gently, but with steel. I am not one of your warriors. I am your partner. This is my part of the fight. Kla, the scout, stepped forward. I can do it. I have a trading wagon. I am due in Red Rock to sell hides. I can hide them under the blankets. I can get them into the town. The plan was desperate. A long shot in the dark. But it was the only one they had. That night, Evelyn and Jesse huddled in the back of Kla's wagon, hidden beneath piles of dried, smelly buffalo hides. They rattled along the trail, the bumps jarring Evelyn's bruised shoulder. They entered Red Rock past midnight. The town was not asleep. It was an armed camp. Soldiers patrolled the boardwalks, and the saloon was blazing with light, full of angry, drunken men. Wanted, a man was shouting, nailing a poster to a post, $500 for the Navajo renegade. Tahoma, dead or alive, for the abduction and murder of Evelyn Harper. Evelyn's blood ran cold. They had already declared her dead. Kla stopped the wagon in the dark alley behind the general store. Charles's office is there, he whispered. Across the street. Be fast. The moon will be up in 1 hour. Jesse went first, checking the shadows. It is clear. Stay here. Evie, let me know, she insisted. He must see me. She pulled her old cloak hood up, obscuring her face, and they slipped across the dusty street. The front of the town was loud, but this side street was dead quiet. The light was on in Charles's office. He was working late. Jesse flattened himself against the wall, his pistol in his hand. I will wait here. Yell if you need me. Evelyn took a breath and knocked on the door. She heard a chair scrape. The door opened. Charles stood there, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his face pale and unshaven. He looked haggard. He stared at her, not comprehending. He thought she was a ghost. Evelyn, he whispered, his voice cracking. No, it cannot be. I went to your funeral. I am alive. Charles, she said, pushing past him into the office. He stumbled back, the whiskey glass falling from his hand and shattering on the floor. But Briggs said he said they had killed you. Briggs lied, she said, her voice cold. He lied about everything. Oh, God, Charles moaned, sinking into his chair. He lied. He told me it was a mistake. He told me you were caught in the crossfire. He is a murderer. Charles, and you are his partner. You drew the maps that led him to the Sacred Valley. You stood by while he planned to kill the Millers. I did not know, he cried, his voice high and thin. I did not know it would be like this. I thought it was just talk. Progress. It is not progress, it is slaughter, she said, walking to his desk. And you are going to help me stop it. How it is too late. Briggs is a madman. He is bringing in the whole army. I need the papers, she said. The real ones. The original survey maps. The ones you showed me. The ones that mark the burial ground. And I need the orders. The letters between Briggs and Henderson. The payments to Carver. I know you have copies. You are a meticulous man, Charles. You would never let Briggs have the only proof. He stared at her, his mind splintering. This was his end, his career, his future, all of it, gone. Why, he whispered, his face pathetic. So you can save him. Is that savage you left me for him? The words hung in the air, full of his small, poisoned pride. I left you because you are a coward, Evelyn said, her voice cutting. I am with him because he is a man, but this is not about him or me. This is about the truth. Give me the papers. Charles, it is the one, last, decent thing you can do. Or you can sit here and let Briggs burn the entire territory, and you with it. He was shaking. He looked at the door, then at her. He was a man trapped. The door burst open, It was not Jesse. It was a local rancher, a man named Hatcher. He had seen her cross the street. His eyes were wide and filled with a drunken, righteous fury. "It is her," he roared, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "The Harper girl. She is alive. She is here. The traitor." Shouts echoed from the main street. "What it is? The savage's whore getter! Jesse ran in! Evelyn, we have to go! Now!" He leveled his pistol at Hatcher. Charles sat frozen, his world collapsing. The crowd was coming. Charles Evelyn screamed, grabbing the front of his shirt. Now choose in a final, spastic motion of self-preservation and, perhaps, one tiny spark of love. He did not fight. He reached into his desk, pulled out a long, cardboard map tube, and shoved it into her hands. "Go," he whispered, his voice dead. "Just go." Jesse grabbed her arm and pulled her out the back door, just as the mob crashed through the front. They heard Charles shouting, "She was never here. You are all drunk. Leave me alone." They scrambled into the wagon, Claw whipping the horses into a run. They fled Red Rock, the shouts of traitor and murderer following them into the dark, a chorus of hate that sealed Evelyn's fate. They rode all night, arriving back at the Navajo camp as the sun was rising. Tahoma was waiting, his face carved from stone. Evelyn, exhausted and covered in dust, slid from the wagon. She held up the map tube. "I have it," she said. They unrolled the documents on a blanket by the fire. It was all there, the maps, showing the sacred valley in precise, damning detail. Marked burial site, clear, and tucked inside, a sheaf of letters. One was a direct order from Briggs to Carver, authorizing payment for clearing hostile ground, dated 2 days before the Miller Ranch was burned. It was the truth, cold, hard, and undeniable. Tahoma looked at the papers, then at Evelyn. He understood. This was the weapon. "We do not wait for him to attack," he said. "We call the meeting. Cla, ride to the Harper Ranch. Tell the doctor his daughter is alive and needs him. Tell him to come to the Valley of the Two Crows. And tell him to bring any rancher who still believes in the law." The meeting took place that afternoon, in a wide, neutral valley. It was a scene that had never happened in the history of the territory. The Hatali and the Navajo elders on one side, on the other, Dr. Harper, his face a wreck of tears and disbelief as he held Evelyn. Beside him stood Jesse and 2 other ranchers, grim-faced men who had known the Millers. "They said you were dead," Dr. Harper whispered, clinging to his daughter. "I am alive, Father," she said, pulling away gently. "And I am not a captive." She stepped into the center of the circle. She held up the maps. She read the letter from Briggs to Carver. A sick silence fell over the ranchers. "He murdered the Millers. One of them." Calloway whispered, "That son of a bitch." Dr. Harper looked from the letter to Hata Ali, his face ashen. "This is a crime against God and man," he said. Tahoma stepped forward. He walked to Evelyn's side, in front of his elders, in front of her father, in front of the white ranchers who had hunted his people. He took her hand. A collective gasp went up. It was a declaration. "We have fought each other for this land," Tahoma said, his voice ringing in the clear air. "But the land does not belong to Briggs. It does not belong to the Iron Horse. We, the Dine, and you, the ranchers, we are the ones who live on it. We are the ones who bleed into it. This is our home." Evelyn squeezed his hand, her own held steady by his. She looked at her father. "We do not just want peace for the land. Father," she said, her voice strong, "we want peace for our family, the one we are going to build, together." The words were an explosion. They were irreversible. Dr. Harper stared at their joined hands, his face a war of shock, fear, and a dawning, terrible respect. Hatali closed his eyes. This was the path. The bridges were not just burned, they were vaporized. To the people of Red Rock, Evelyn Harper was a traitor, a woman who had betrayed her race. To the conservative Navajo, Tahoma was a fool, a warrior who had brought the enemy into their heart. They were outcasts. They were pariahs. And for the first time in her life, standing in that valley, holding his hand, Evelyn felt completely, terrifyingly free. "What now?" Jesse asked, looking at the united, grim faces. Tahoma held up the letter. "Now," he said, his eyes on the trail that led back to the fort. We do not wait for the war to come to us. We take this truth to him. Major Nathan Briggs was a man possessed. The revelation of the documents, the theft of his dynamite, and the survival of the woman he had declared dead had stripped away his veneer of civilized military authority. What remained was a raw, exposed nerve of fury. He sat on his horse at the mouth of the canyon, the sun beating down on the back of his neck, watching the dust settle from the march. Behind him were 80 cavalrymen, the remainder of his force, and beside them rode 30 of Luke Carver's hired guns. They were a motley, dangerous force, a mixture of discipline and depravity. Charles Whitmore sat on a nervous mare beside the major. His hands were tied to the saddle horn. Briggs had not taken kindly to the disappearance of the papers, and though he could not prove Charles had given them up, the engineer's terror was proof enough. Charles looked at the red walls of the canyon rising like tombstones on either side. He knew the terrain. He had drawn the maps, and he knew that marching a column into this throat of stone was madness. "Forward," Briggs commanded, his voice cracking with the strain. "We burn them out, every structure, every savage. And if you see the girl, shoot her. She is a traitor to her race." Carver, riding a heavy black gelding, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dry earth. He wore his feathers and paint again, a grotesque mockery that no longer fooled anyone but served to frighten the superstitious. He checked the load in his repeater rifle. He did not care about the railroad or politics. He wanted the head of the Navajo who had humiliated him, deep inside the sacred valley. The silence was heavy and expectant. Tahoma stood behind a barricade of fallen rocks and scrub brush, positioned at the narrowest point of the entry pass. To his left lay Jesse Harper, cradling a Winchester, his face pale but set with a grim determination. To his right were the warriors of the Ding, men who had painted their faces with the black ash of mourning and war. They were not fighting for glory. They were fighting for the bones of their fathers. Further back, near the spring, Dr. Harper was setting up a field hospital. He laid out his instruments on a clean white cloth spread over a flat rock. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. He had spent a lifetime trying to heal the damage men did to one another. Now, he was preparing to patch up his own children in a war he had tried to ignore. Evelyn stood near the center of the defensive line. She wore a man's shirt and a long skirt pinned up for riding. A cartridge belt hung heavy on her hips, and a rifle was in her hands. She was not on the front line. Tahoma had insisted she stay back to guard the women and children who were sheltering in the deep caves near the spring, but she refused to hide. She was the runner, the medic, the second pair of eyes. "They are coming." A scout signaled from the high ridge. The ground began to tremble. It was a low vibration at first, then a rhythmic pounding. The enemy was not being subtle. They were coming with speed and violence. "Hold your fire," Tahoma said, his voice carrying clearly in the canyon acoustic. "Wait until they are in the shadows." The first riders burst into view around the bend of the canyon wall. It was Carver's men, riding hard, yelling like demons. They expected fear. They expected the Navajo to scatter. Instead, they met a wall of lead. "Fire!" Tahoma roared. The canyon erupted. Muzzle flashes sparked from the rocks. 3 of the lead riders were thrown from their saddles instantly. The horses screamed and reared, blocking the path for the soldiers behind them. The charge shattered before it had even begun. "Dismount! Take cover!" Briggs screamed from the rear. The battle dissolved into a chaotic, deafening exchange of gunfire. Bullets chipped the red stone, sending showers of razor-sharp shell raining down on the defenders. The air filled with the acrid smoke of black powder. Evelyn watched as a young warrior near her was spun around by a bullet to the shoulder. She dropped her rifle and ran to him, dragging him behind a boulder. She pressed a compress to the wound, her hands moving with efficient speed. "Stay down," she ordered him, her voice tight. She looked up and froze. Through the smoke, she saw movement on the far side of the creek. A group of Carver's men had flanked the main position. They were not shooting at the warriors. They were moving toward the base of the eastern cliff, carrying heavy wooden crates, dynamite. They did not have the train car, but they had salvaged enough explosives to bring down the overhang. And huddled in the shadow of that overhang were a dozen Navajo women and children who had been cut off from the caves. Tahoma Evelyn screamed, but her voice was lost in the roar of a volley from the soldiers. She did not hesitate. She grabbed her rifle and broke cover. She ran across the open ground, bullets kicking up spurts of red dust around her boots. She did not feel fear. She felt a cold, crystalline clarity. If those men lit the fuses, the cliff would collapse, burying the families alive. She reached the creek bed and dropped to one knee. She leveled her rifle. The man with the dynamite crate was struggling up the scree slope. She squeezed the trigger. The man jerked, dropping the crate. It tumbled down the slope, breaking open but not detonating. The other two men turned, seeing her. A girl, one of them shouted, "Get her!" They raised their pistols. Evelyn worked the lever of her rifle, ejecting the spent shell. She fired again, forcing them to dive for cover. "Run!" she screamed to the women. "Get to the caves! Run!" The mothers grabbed their children, scrambling away from the cliff face. Evelyn kept firing, pinning the men down. A bullet tore through the hem of her skirt. Another hissed past her ear like an angry hornet. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the men attacking her. Tahoma had seen her. He had seen the threat. He came off the high rocks like a mountain lion, knife in hand. He did not shoot. He fell upon the two men with a terrifying, silent ferocity. In seconds, it was over. He looked at Evelyn, his chest heaving, blood on his hands that was not his own. "Go back," he shouted at her. "I am not leaving them," she shouted back, pointing to the retreating families. Before he could argue, a roar from the main path drew their attention. Luke Carver had broken through the line. He had rallied his men and pushed into the center of the valley. He was riding straight for the spring, straight for the heart of the camp. Tahoma whistled for his pinto. He mounted in a fluid motion and charged. This was personal. This was the man who had worn the face of the dying to commit murder. Carver saw him coming. He reined in his black horse, grinning. He holstered his pistol and drew a heavy Bowie knife. He wanted to carve the savage himself. The two horses collided with the sound of thunder. Tahoma and Carver grappled, sliding from their saddles to the dust. It was a brutal, ugly fight. Carver was bigger, heavier, and he fought with the desperate strength of a brawler. He swung the heavy knife, slashing Tahoma's arm. Tahoma did not cry out. He moved with the economy of a man who had lived his life on this hard land. He ducked a second swing, stepping inside Carver's guard. He drove his shoulder into Carver's chest, knocking the wind out of him. Carver stumbled back, gasping. "You red devil," he wheezed. Tahoma looked at him with eyes as cold as obsidian. "You are not a devil," Tahoma said. "You are just a thief." Carver lunged. Tahoma sidestepped, catching Carver's wrist. With a sharp twist and a sound of snapping bone, he forced the knife from Carver's hand. He swept the man's legs out from under him. Carver hit the ground hard. Tahoma stood over him, the point of his own knife at Carver's throat. "Yield," Tahoma commanded. Carver glared up at him, hate burning in his eyes. "Go to hell." Before Tahoma could finish it, a shot rang out. A bullet struck the ground inches from Tahoma's boot. He looked up. 50 yards away, Major Briggs sat on his horse. He held a long-barreled pistol, extended at arm's length. He was aiming carefully. He was not aiming at Carver. He was aiming at Tahoma's back. "I will kill you myself!" Briggs screamed, his face purple with rage. Charles Whitmore, his hands still bound to his saddle, sat his horse next to the major. He watched the scene unfold in slow motion. He saw Evelyn running from the creek toward Tahoma. He saw Tahoma standing over Carver, and he saw the major, the man he had admired, the man he had followed, preparing to murder a man in cold blood to save his own reputation. Charles looked at Evelyn. She was screaming something, but he could not hear her. He saw the terror in her eyes, not for herself, for the Navajo warrior. Something broke inside Charles, the fear that had ruled him his entire life, the ambition that had made him silent. It all shattered. He realized with a sudden blinding clarity that he was already dead. His career was over. His honor was gone. All he had left was this 1 second. Major Charles shouted. He kicked his horse hard, driving it sideways. He threw his body weight against Briggs. The collision knocked Briggs's aim wide. The pistol fired, the bullet singing harmlessly into the sky. Briggs roared in fury. He turned the gun on Charles. "You traitorous coward!" he fired. The shot hit Charles in the chest. The force of it knocked the engineer backward out of the saddle. He hit the ground with a dull thud. No Evelyn screamed. Briggs, unhinged now, swung his gun back toward Tahoma, but the moment was lost. Jesse Harper had seen his sister's peril. From his position on the rocks, he took aim with his Winchester. He fired. The bullet struck Briggs in the shoulder, shattering the bone. The major dropped his pistol. He screamed, clutching his arm, swaying in the saddle. The tide of the battle turned. The soldiers, seeing their commander wounded and their hired guns defeated, began to falter. The ranchers and the Navajo pressed forward, driving them back toward the canyon mouth. Evelyn ran past Tahoma. She fell to her knees beside Charles. He was lying on his back, staring up at the strip of blue sky between the canyon walls. A dark stain was spreading rapidly across his white shirt. His breathing was wet and shallow. "Charles," Evelyn whispered, pressing her hands over the wound, trying to staunch the flow. "Charles, hold on. Father's just over there." Charles looked at her. His eyes were unfocused, glazing over. He smiled, a weak, trembling thing. "Did I stop him?" he wheezed. "Yes," Evelyn said, tears streaming down her face. "You saved him. You saved us." "I gave you the papers," Charles whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "I did one thing right. Tell them I did one right thing. You did. Charles, you were brave." He let out a long, rattling sigh. The light faded from his eyes. His hand, which had been grasping at the dirt, went still. Charles Whitmore, the man who had come west to build a railroad and make a fortune, lay dead in the dust of a land he never understood. A shadow fell over them. Tahoma stood there. He looked down at the dead man, then at Evelyn. He placed a hand on her shoulder. There was no jealousy, only a solemn respect for the sacrifice. "It is not over," Tahoma said. He pointed. Briggs, though wounded and bleeding heavily, was not surrendering. He had slid from his horse and was dragging himself toward the pile of dynamite crates that Carver's men had abandoned near the cliff wall. He had a lucifer match in his good hand. "He is going to blow the wall," Tahoma said. "He wants to bury us all." Briggs was laughing, a manic, bubbling sound. "If I cannot have it, no one can," he shrieked. He struck the match against a rock. Tahoma raised his rifle, but Briggs was behind cover. Only his hand and the crates were visible. Jesse fired again, but the shot went wide, kicking up dust. Briggs tossed the match. It landed in the open crate of loose powder. "Run!" Tahoma roared, grabbing Evelyn and pulling her back. They dove behind a heavy slab of sandstone just as the world turned white. The explosion was not the earth-shattering destruction Briggs had intended. The main charge had not been properly set, but the crate of black powder detonated with tremendous force. It did not bring down the entire cliff. Instead, it blasted outward, destabilizing the massive, precarious formation of red rock directly above where Briggs lay. Thousands of tons of sandstone, loosened by centuries of wind and water, detached from the canyon wall. It sounded like the end of the world. There was no scream. There was no time. Major Nathan Briggs, the architect of the war, was simply erased. He was buried instantly under a mountain of the very land he had tried to conquer. The dust cloud rose thousands of feet into the air, choking the sun. Silence followed, absolute and ringing. The surviving soldiers and mercenaries, seeing their leader vanished and the very earth turning against them, threw down their weapons. They raised their hands. The fight had gone out of them. Evelyn lay in the dirt, Tahoma's arm heavy across her back, shielding her. She coughed, tasting the dust. She pushed herself up. The air was thick with haze. Through it, she saw the figures of the warriors standing tall on the rocks. She saw her father running toward her, his bag in his hand. She saw Jesse standing over the prisoners, his rifle lowered, and she saw the new pile of rocks at the base of the cliff, a tomb for a man's greed. Tahoma stood up and pulled Evelyn to her feet. He looked at her, his face streaked with sweat and war paint. He checked her for wounds. his hands running quickly over her arms, her shoulders. "You are safe?" he asked. "I am safe," she said. He looked at the body of Charles, then at the tomb of Briggs. He looked at the defeated men being rounded up by his warriors. "The water is safe," he said. "The ancestors are safe." But Evelyn looked around. It was a victory. Yes, but the cost was painted in red on the canyon floor. 3 Navajo warriors lay dead near the barricade. One of the ranchers who had ridden with Jesse was slumped over a rock, lifeless, and Charles lay at her feet. She walked over to Charles and gently closed his eyes. She took her handkerchief and wiped the blood from his mouth. "He found his courage," she said softly. "He found his honor," Tahoma corrected her. "He died a warrior." Dr. Harper reached them. He hugged Evelyn so hard she thought her ribs might crack. He was crying, great sobbing tears of relief. I thought I had lost you both," he stammered. "You will not lose us." "Father," Evelyn said, holding him. She looked over her father's shoulder at Tahoma. He was watching them, standing slightly apart. He was the victor, the war chief, the hero, but in his eyes, she saw the loneliness of command. She saw the weight of the dead men he would have to bury. She pulled away from her father and reached out her hand to Tahoma. "Come," she said. He hesitated, then stepped forward. He took her hand. Her father did not flinch. He looked at the Navajo warrior, then nodded. "We have work to do," Dr. Harper said, his voice steadying. "There are wounded men on both sides." They worked until nightfall. Evelyn, Tahoma, the doctor, and Hatayali. They did not distinguish between the soldier and the warrior. They stitched flesh and set bones. The hatred that had fueled the morning was drowned in the shared exhaustion of survival. That night, the camp was quiet. There was no victory dance. There was only a low mourning song for the dead. Evelyn sat by the fire, staring into the embers. The papers Charles had given her were safe in her saddlebag. They were the shield that would protect them tomorrow. But tonight, the sword had done its work. Tahoma sat beside her. He did not speak. He simply took his knife and cut a piece of meat, offering it to her. It was a simple gesture, domestic and intimate. "We did it," she whispered. "We survived," he said. "The war for the land is done. The war for peace begins now." He looked toward the east, where the railroad tracks lay silent. "They will not come back," he said. "Not like this. The mountain has spoken." Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. She was tired in a way she had never been before, but as she listened to the steady beat of his heart, she knew that for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she belonged. She was no longer the girl in the parlor or the captive in the hogan. She was a survivor of the Sacred Valley, and she was home. The days that followed the battle were heavy and quiet, shrouded in the dust of mourning. The victory was a hard, brittle thing, tasting of ash. The dead had to be buried. For the first time in the territory's memory, 2 funeral pyres were built. The Navajo sang their mourning songs for their 3 fallen warriors, their voices a low, haunting melody that echoed off the canyon walls. Not 50 yards away, Dr. Harper read from a worn Bible, his voice thick with grief, as they lowered the body of Calloway, the rancher, into the rocky soil. They buried Charles Whitmore there, too. There was no one to send him home to, no family in the east who had claimed him. He belonged to this land now, the land he had tried to map and conquer, and which had, in the end, claimed him. Evelyn stood over the simple mound of stones. Jesse had carved his name into a piece of scrap wood. She placed a single, stubborn yellow wildflower on the grave. "Thank you, Charles," she whispered. She was not thanking the man who had been her fiancé. She was thanking the man who had, in his last, desperate second, found the courage to do one right thing. They kept the captured soldiers and Carver's men under guard. Luke Carver himself was tied to a post, his face a mask of sullen, silent hatred. He knew his fate. On the 4th day, the investigators arrived. They were not the rough soldiers of the fort. This was a colonel from Santa Fe, a man with a starched uniform and cold, intelligent eyes, and with him, 2 men in dark suits. They were lawyers for the railroad. They had been sent to investigate reports of a full-scale war, the death of a major, and the destruction of company property. The meeting was held in the open air, in the shadow of the rock slide that was Major Briggs's tomb. The colonel set up a field table. He listened, his face impassive, as his own soldiers, the ones who had been captured, told their story. They spoke of Briggs's rage, of his orders to take no prisoners, of his obsession with the valley. They spoke of the ambush in the Box Canyon, and their growing suspicion that it had been a setup. Then the rancher Calloway's partner spoke. He told the colonel about the meeting in the valley, about the proof. What proof, the colonel asked, his voice sharp. Evelyn stepped forward. She placed the map tube on the table. She unrolled the letters from Briggs to Carver. She unrolled the maps. Charles's precise, beautiful maps, with the burial sites clearly marked for destruction. Major Briggs was not a soldier. "Colonel," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "He was a murderer. He used his uniform to act as an enforcer for the railroad, and he murdered the Miller family to start a war he could profit from." The railroad lawyers went pale. One of them began to sweat profusely. "This was not an investigation. It was an indictment. This is highly irregular." "Miss Harper," the colonel said, but his eyes were fixed on Briggs's signature. "It is the truth," Dr. Harper said, stepping to his daughter's side. "I am an officer of the late Union Army, sir. I know a lawful order from a conspiracy. This was a land grab, paid for in blood. The final proof was Luke Carver. Tahoma dragged him before the table. 'Speak,' Tahoma commanded. Carver looked at the colonel, at the lawyers, and he knew the game was over. He was a dead man, but he could still spit his venom. "Yeah, I did it," Carver snarled, a bloody grin splitting his face. "Burned the Millers, painted my boys up like savages. Briggs paid me $1,000 in gold, and he promised me salvage rights to this whole valley. He was a smart man, until he got stupid, until she got in the way." He spat at Evelyn's feet. The colonel had heard enough. He stood. "Sergeant," he ordered a man beside him, "take this man and the rest of his gang. They will be transported to Santa Fe. They will hang." He then turned to the railroad lawyers. "Gentlemen, it appears your company has been the victim of a terrible fraud, perpetrated by the late Major Briggs. I am sure you will want to distance yourselves from this tragedy immediately." The lawyers understood. This was a scandal that could ruin them. Of course. "Colonel," the lead lawyer said, wiping his brow. This proposed route was clearly a mistake, an engineering error. "We will, of course, be recommending a full reroute, far to the south. The company deeply regrets this misunderstanding. We will naturally compensate the local ranchers, like Dr. Harper, for any and all damages. They were protecting their reputation. They were cutting their losses, but the result was the same." The Hatali, who had watched the entire exchange in silence, understood the shift in power. He stepped forward and pointed to the rock slide. "The mountain has spoken," he said in Navajo. "This valley is not for you." The colonel looked at the elder, then at Tahoma, then at Evelyn. "This valley," he said, with the weariness of a man who had seen too much, "is no longer my concern." That evening, the army left. They took the prisoners with them. The valley was quiet for the first time in weeks. Dr. Harper sat by the fire, cleaning his medical instruments. Tahoma approached him. The two men stood in silence for a long moment, the doctor polishing a scalpel, the warrior watching him. "She is not a prize," Dr. Harper said. Not looking up. "I know that," Tahoma replied. "I came west because I was tired of watching boys die. I wanted to build something, a home, a safe place for her. I wanted her to have a soft life." He finally looked at Tahoma, his eyes filled with his father's pain. "And now she is a warrior. She has killed a man. She wants to marry a man my world calls a savage." "And what do you call me?" Tahoma asked. "I call you the man who saved her life," Dr. Harper said, his voice rough. "Twice. I call you the man who led his people to a victory they should not have won, and I am grateful to you, but gratitude does not make you a husband. I will not give her to you, son. She is not mine to give. I am not asking you to give her to me," Tahoma said. He stood straighter. "I am telling you that I love her. I am telling you that I see her. All of her. Not as a white woman, or a prize, or a possession. I see her, and I will spend my life honoring her." Dr. Harper looked at the warrior's face. He saw no arrogance, no pride of ownership. He saw only a deep, profound respect. The same respect he had seen in Evelyn's eyes when she looked at Tahoma. He let out a long breath. "This will be a hard life, for you both. The world will not be kind. We are not afraid of a hard life," Tahoma said. "We are afraid of a false one." The doctor nodded slowly. He was still afraid. He was terrified. But he was a man who knew how to trust his daughter, and his daughter had chosen. "Then you must build a strong house," Dr. Harper said, turning back to his instruments. A very strong house. The acceptance of the Navajo was a different matter. The Hatali called a second council. The victory was sweet, but the cost had been high, and the alliance that won it was unprecedented. "The white woman has brought war to our valley," one of the older, more conservative elders argued. "She has brought soldiers. 3 of our sons are dead. Now she would stay. She would mix her blood with the blood of our war chief. This is poison. She is the poison that cured the sickness," the Hatali replied, his voice quiet. A third man, a shaman so old his skin looked like wrinkled parchment, rose to his feet. He had not spoken in the entire conflict. He leaned on a simple juniper staff. "I have watched," the shaman said, his voice a dry whisper. "I watched her when she first came, a captive. I watched her when she healed the child. I watched her when she stood against her own people in her father's yard, and I watched her in the battle." He pointed a thin, trembling finger at Evelyn. "She did not run when the bullets came. She ran toward the women. She ran toward the children. Her blood, from the white man's bullet, has mixed with the dust of this sacred valley. Her spirit is no longer separate. She did not choose us. The land chose her. She has stayed, in the fire, in the blood, and in the tears. She is dying now, in her heart. To send her away would be to cut out a part of ourselves." The council was silent. The shaman had spoken. He looked at Evelyn. "You may stay, daughter. You are welcome. But you are not a white woman living among us. You are a Navajo woman who was born in a different place. You must learn our ways. You must learn our tongue. You must honor our laws and our spirits." Evelyn met his ancient gaze. "I will," she said, her voice clear and without hesitation. "I will honor this land and this family for all of my days." Later, she and Tahoma walked to the edge of the valley, looking out over the lands below. Her father's ranch was a small, dark square in the distance. The sacred valley lay behind them. She felt the last of her old conflict drain away. She did not have to choose between the ranch and the valley. She did not have to be white or Navajo. She could be the bridge between them. She was Evelyn Harper, and she was the woman of Tahoma. She was both. Tahoma stood beside her, his hand in hers. He looked at the land, his land, the land he had saved, the guilt he had carried for so long, the shame of his time as a scout, of leading the soldiers, was finally gone. He had not just redeemed the land, he had redeemed himself. "My father said we must build a strong house," Evelyn said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "He is a wise man," Tahoma replied. "I do not want to live in the camp," she said. "And I do not want to live at the ranch, not all the time." He nodded, understanding. "There is a place," he said, pointing. "There, on the ridge. It is the boundary line. It is not your father's land, and it is not the land of the Dine. It is the land in between. We will build our house there, a house of wood and stone," she said, smiling. "With a roof for the rain and a Navajo blanket on the floor. Jesse will help." She continued. "He told me he wants to learn how to build a proper hogan, and your father Tahoma asked." Evelyn smiled. "He said he will be ready. He is already practicing to be a grandfather." They stood there for a long time, watching the sunset. The war was over. The fight was done. The future was a blank, unmapped territory, just like the land in front of them, and they would walk into it together. The train whistle still came on the wind, but it was a distant sound now, a thin, lonely cry from the south. 5 years had passed. The railroad, bowing to the political scandal in the sheer, stubborn granite of the rock slide, had rerouted its tracks. They now cut through the lowlands, 10 miles south, bypassing the sacred valley completely. The Iron Horse still came to the territory, but it came on the territory's terms, not through its heart. Red Rock was bigger. The railroad had brought money, and money brought buildings. There was a bank with a brick facade now, and a telegraph office. But the town had learned a hard lesson. The new cavalry commander, a quiet man who read books, kept the peace but did not seek war. The stories of Major Briggs and Luke Carver were told as cautionary tales, a dark chapter of greed that had almost cost them everything. The name Harper was spoken with a strange, grudging respect, and the name Tahoma was spoken with fear and with awe. High on the ridge, balanced on the boundary line between the Harper Ranch and the Dine Lands, stood the house. It was not a Hogan, and it was not a ranch house. It was both. Jesse, who had poured his restless energy into creation rather than destruction, had helped Tahoma build the main structure. It was made of solid pine, with a wide porch that faced the sunrise. But the inside was all Evelyn and Tahoma. On one wall, a bookshelf held her father's medical texts, Shakespeare, and volumes of poetry. On the floor, the deep red, black, and white geometry of a large Navajo rug, woven by Nijoni, the widow who had, in time, become one of Evelyn's closest friends. This was the house in between. It was the place where Dr. Harper, now gray-haired and walking with a cane, would come for dinner on Sundays. He would sit at the table with Hatali, the old medicine man. They rarely spoke the same language, but they shared a pipe and looked at their grandchildren. And that was a language all its own. There were two of them, a boy of 4 years named Samuel, for his grandfather, but whom the Navajo called Ash, for the tree that grows in 2 worlds, and a girl of 2 named Apony, a word for a butterfly, because she had been born in the spring when the lupines were in bloom. They were children of the ridge. They ran barefoot on the hot stone, their skin the color of honeyed bronze, their hair a wild tangle of black and brown. They spoke English to their grandfather, who was teaching them to read, and they spoke Navajo to the Hatali, who was teaching them the sacred names of the mountains. In the mornings, Dr. Harper, his old surgeon's hands now gentle, would show Samuel how to find the willow bark for fever. In the afternoons, the Hatali would show him which stones held the turquoise spirit. They were children of 2 medicines, 2 histories. When they played at hunting buffalo, but they also read from their mother's books. The animosity that had defined the territory had not vanished. It had merely softened, the hard edges worn down by time, shared weather, and the undeniable laughter of children. In Red Rock, there were still those, like the wife of the general store owner, who would sniff and call Evelyn's family that mixed bunch. And in the Navajo camp, there were still elders who muttered that Tahoma had opened the door to the outside world too wide, that their traditions would be diluted. But the hate was hard to maintain. It was hard to hate the woman who had ridden into town to fix your child's broken arm. It was hard to mistrust the man who had organized the winter hunt that fed both Navajo and white ranchers during the hard freeze of 1878. Once a year, in the month of the yellow leaf, the gathering of 2 crows was held, named for the valley where they had first made their stand. The ranchers, led by Jesse, who now ran his father's ranch, would bring barrels of apples, sacks of flour, and coffee. The Navajo would bring blankets, turquoise, and venison. They would trade. They would hold horse races. They would dance. Evelyn, her hair now longer, braided in the Navajo style but tied with a ribbon from her mother, would teach the young Navajo women the steps of a Virginia reel. And Tahoma, his war chief days behind him, his face settled into the quiet strength of a father, would join her. He was clumsy, his feet used to the shuffle of the chant, not the quick step of the fiddle, but he would do it for her. They would laugh, spinning in the firelight, an image of a future that few had believed possible. The conflict had not ended. It had just learned to live with itself. One evening, Evelyn sat on the porch, mending a small pair of buckskin trousers for her son. The distant sound of the train whistle came in the wind. It was faint, almost a memory. She thought back to that day, all those years ago, the stagecoach, the dust, the man with the painted face and the yellow teeth. She remembered the fear. She remembered the life that had been laid out for her, a cold marriage to Charles, a quiet, airless life in town, a slow fading of the fire inside her. If Tahoma had not appeared on that ridge, she thought, her life would have been a long, silent winter. She looked at her hands, no longer the soft hands of a doctor's daughter, but strong, calloused, and capable. She had not been rescued from the stagecoach. She had been liberated. Tahoma came and sat beside her. He had been checking the horses. He was quiet, but she felt the solid, warm presence of him like a rock at her back. He did not ask what she was thinking. He never had to. He watched his children. Sam and a pony were playing by the stream that marked the boundary line. The boy was trying to build a small dam of pebbles. The girl, Apponai, toddled over and kicked it down, laughing. The sight, so simple, so perfect, sent Tahoma's mind tumbling back. He did not think of the battle. He did not think of the train. He thought of a dark, cold cave, the wind howling outside like a hungry wolf. He thought of a woman, her body trembling not from the cold, but from a lifetime of fear. He remembered the desperate, raw whisper that had broken his heart. "Don't hurt me." He looked at Evelyn, now humming a quiet song, her needle moving with a steady, peaceful rhythm. He looked at his son, who was now patiently showing his daughter how to place the stones. His promise, "Only love touches you tonight," he realized, with a deep, quiet surge of gratitude, that he had kept that promise. He had kept it every day. The fear was gone from her eyes. The trembling was gone from her hands. She was safe. Evelyn finished her stitch and looked up, catching his eye. She smiled, the same smile that had stunned him in the cave, the one that understood everything. "It is a good sunset," she said. He stood and held out his hand. She took it, her hand fitting into his as if it had been made to be there. They walked to the edge of the ridge, the place where the world fell away into a sea of red rock and purple shadow. The sun was a massive, molten globe, bleeding fire into the high clouds. They stood, hand in hand, looking at the land they had saved, the land that had saved them. The earth beneath their feet was solid, a foundation of stone and bone and shared history. The sky above them was endless, a vast, open promise of freedom. The stories of the Wild West would always be written in gunpowder and gold. They would be tales of hard men and high stakes. But here, on this ridge, was the other story, the truer one. It was the story of a land that did not belong to any one person, but that held room for anyone brave enough to belong to it. It was the story of a man and a woman who had looked across the impossible divide of race, war, and prejudice, and had refused to see an enemy. Tahoma put his arm around her waist, pulling her close. This, he knew, was true freedom. It was not running. It was not hiding. It was standing your ground, hand in hand, on the earth you had chosen, and watching the sun go down on a home you had built together. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to hear what you thought, so please leave a comment and let us know where in the world you are listening from. We love sharing these tales. Please subscribe to the channel, Wild West Tales. Give this video a like. And if you really want to support us, hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.